My wife Iris sat on the couch next to me, holding the bowl of popcorn in her thin hands. On our other side, our little boy, Freddie, sat. He looked just like his mother with the same dirty blonde hair and faraway eyes, like the eyes of a dreamer. The movie played across our flat-screen TV, some CGI comedy with talking penguins and llamas that could drive cars. It was some garbage from Disney that I would have never watched in a million years, but Freddie liked it, so I suffered through it for him. We had turned off all the lights in the house for the movie. Only the TV's flickering colors illuminated the room, sending dancing shadows that flashed out behind us. Suddenly, outside the living room window, a bolt of lightning came down from the sky, splitting a tree in our front yard in two. Light flooded in through the window as if the flash of a nuclear missile were ripping its way across the town. A crash rang out as the tree split down the middle, its massive branches tumbling down onto the lawn. I jumped as the ground shook. More lightning flashed nearby, hitting other houses and lawns on the street. There wasn't supposed to be any storms, I said in surprise. The TV had gone black, and now we sat in darkness. For a long moment, I thought that the power had gone out. Abruptly, it came back on with a roar of white noise and a flickering of static. The volume seemed to be increasing by itself, growing into a rushing cacophony like a waterfall. I saw Iris try to scream something, but I could only see her lips move. As suddenly as it had all started, it stopped. The standard "Please stand by" screen with a rainbow of blocky colors behind it appeared. There was a clanging, ringing sound that emanated from the speakers, high-pitched and whining. And then text started appearing across the screen. At the same time, a deep, serious voice spoke in the background, like a radio announcer reporting on the death of a president. "This is the Cryptid Emergency Alert Broadcast System," the voice read grimly. "This is not a test. Level 5 activity has been reported in your area. Do not go outside. Close all blinds, shutters, and windows. Lock all doors and close any attached garages. Do not open your doors except to military or police personnel with the proper insignia. Even if someone appears to be in distress, do not open your door to investigate or try to intervene in any way. A temporary quarantine is in effect for your area. Military and police assistance is on the way. To ensure the greatest chances of survival during this time of crisis, please abide by the following rules. 1. If blood begins to pour under your door, go to a higher floor immediately. Avoid physical contact with the blood at all costs. 2. All legitimate military and police personnel will have a special insignia on their helmets and jackets, an eye contained in a double-thumbed fist. Only accompany them if they have this insignia, otherwise they are imposters. 3. Avoid mirrors for the duration of the emergency. The voice cut out abruptly, slowing down in a mechanical whine. Static started flashing across the TV, covering the "Please stand by" message that had returned in blocky letters. At that moment, the lights went out. They came back on a couple of seconds later, brightening and dimming before the power had failed again. This time, the electricity did not come back on. "What the heck?" Iris whispered next to me, taking out her phone and shining the light across the dark living room. "That was pretty weird. Everything looks different outside too. I was outside an hour ago and the moon didn't look anything like that." She pointed. I got up, realizing that she was right. The nighttime sky outside looked strange. I looked out the front window, seeing the moon was cast in a fluorescent orange light. The cloudless sky had a dark red glow to it, as if some kind of eerie smog had covered everything. I had seen similar things happen after massive forest fires in the past. "What happened, Dad?" Freddie asked in a small voice. "Where's the movie?" "Oh, I think we lost power, little man," I said, ruffling his hair in a nonchalant manner. I didn't really believe the emergency broadcast after all. I figured some teenager had hacked the TV station and decided to play a prank. Or perhaps some disgruntled employee had done it on his last day as a kind of a screw you to the station. I had heard of similar things happening before. It was somewhat strange how the power had gone out and the sky had changed, but I felt sure that it all could be logically explained. Someone shrieked outside. I looked out onto the dark street, seeing the silhouette of somebody running frantically down the middle of the street, zigzagging wildly. As the figure got closer, I realized it was a young woman. She looked like she was in her mid-20s. She wore a white shirt and khakis. Her clothes were soaked in streams of blood that made the fabric cling to her body. I saw a vicious gash bitten into her left shoulder, a wound so deep that the white bone peeked out through the ragged patches of flesh. "Help me," she wailed, her eyes wild and panicked. "Why won't anyone help me?" She staggered and fell forward, crying and bleeding all over the road. I was about to run outside to see what was wrong with the young woman when I saw another silhouette creeping up behind her. It looked to be the body of a man, but something was wrong. As he drew closer, I caught a glimpse of the man's face through the dim light. The left side of it was rotted and decayed, while the right looked muscular and healthy. He wore a black suit that looked little more than tatters. Pieces of it fell off in ragged strips. I could see his left hand was also decomposing. Whatever kind of sickness it was, it seemed to extend to the whole left side of his body. The stiff, skeletal leg cracked as he dragged it behind him, silently drawing nearer to the young woman. The living side of his face split into an insane grin as he looked down at us. He carried a blood-stained axe that dragged on the pavement behind him with a harsh, metallic groan. "Get away from me!" The woman screamed at the abomination, trying to kick at him, but she looked weakened from blood loss and her attempts were feeble and slow. The man laughed, a sound that rang out like the gurgling of blood. He spat bugs from his mouth onto the dark street below. He knelt down before the gasping woman and gave her a low whisper. It carried on the dead, silent air. "So warm," he murmured, wiping his dead, putrefying fingers across these streams of blood that spurted from her left shoulder. He stuck an inhumanly long pointed tongue out of his chattering lips and began to lick the blood off of his hands. But not enough. Not nearly enough. He stuck the bony, decaying fingers of his left hand into the wound and started pulling at it. Red bubbled out in increasing quantities, covering her body in its wet sheen. The woman jerked, her face turning pale and bloodless. She tried to kick at him, but he only laughed again, gurgling like a man with a cut throat. In horror, I watched him raise the axe above his head. It stood there for a long moment, trembling in his shaking hands like a guillotine blade. "Please, don't," the woman pleaded as he grinned down at her. In a blur, he swung the axe down into her forehead. There was a wet cracking and ringing of metal. She sat there with her mouth open for what felt like a very long moment, and then limply collapsed to the pavement. A dull thud echoed down the street as her head smacked the ground. Sickened, I closed the blinds on the window and turned away, realizing that Freddie and Iris had been standing right behind me the entire time, watching the horrific display. Freddie was crying quietly into his hands, while Iris looked pale, her green eyes wide and unbelieving. The woman exhaled one last time, a long, drawn-out death rattle, and then everything went silent. I felt sick and weak. Staggering, I put my hand out against the wall. A wave of nausea rose up in my stomach. I ran towards the bathroom, shining the light from my cell phone to light the way. Iris started crying. I heard her frantically trying to dial 911 over and over again. "Nothing's working," she cried. I stumbled into the bathroom and threw up all the popcorn and soda that I had consumed that night into the toilet. Covered in sweat, I started wiping my face with toilet paper. I pushed myself up, glancing into the mirror. A cadaverous version of myself stood there, the dead face showing horror and surprise just like my own. I saw the same high cheekbones, the same shaved head, but in the mirror image, bugs writhed and squirmed in the flesh. I backpedaled into the wall, stuttering something incomprehensible. The reflected image did the same, his lipless mouth opening and closing with silent curses. He wore the same clothes as myself, a black t-shirt and blue jeans, but they were rotted and tattered as if they had been dug out of a grave. "What the heck?" I said, raising my right hand experimentally. The mirror image did the same, matching every single movement perfectly. At that moment, Iris came running into the bathroom, her soft footsteps thudding gently against the marble floor. I jumped, turning to her. "There's somebody outside the door," she whispered, her face pale. I glanced back at the reflection, seeing that the other version was no longer following my movements. "Watch out," I cried, but it was too late. The skull-like face came forward in a blur. His arm shot out towards Iris, and the surface of the mirror swirled as if it were made of water when his pale flesh made contact with it. The sharp points of bone on his fingers wrapped around Iris's neck. Stunned and silent, I watched in horror as he started dragging her into that other world. "Stop him," she screamed. "God, make him stop." I ran forward, grabbing her legs as her head and chest was sucked through. There was a slight popping sound when her body had entered the liquid-like surface. I tried to hold on with all of my strength, but whatever abomination was on the other side was strong, much stronger than me. His iron grip yanked her out of my hands. "Dad?" Freddy asked, slinking into the bathroom. His eyes were wide and wild. He looked around confused. "Where's Mom, and who's screaming?" I had to make a decision instantly, I knew. I could either stay with my son or try to get my wife back. I knew that I couldn't just leave Iris, though. I felt mentally torn. I looked between him and the mirror, my heart quivering with anxiety. "Freddy, go wait in the living room. Hide behind the couch. Don't answer the door or say anything to anyone, no matter what. I'll be right back." I wasn't sure if I would or not. Before I turned to the mirror, I patted his head. "Remember the rules they read us on the TV." He nodded, but he was only a 7-year-old boy. How much did he really understand? Heck, how much did I even understand? I hadn't followed the rules, and now Iris was taken. I turned back to the mirror, seeing that I had no reflection now. There was no sign of Iris or the rotted corpse with my face. Slowly, I walked forward, putting my trembling hand out towards its silvery surface. My fingers went through the mirror as if it were mere air, but I felt something freezing cold ripple around my skin. Pins and needles rushed up my arm. Taking a deep breath in, I pushed myself up on the counter and went all the way through. I fell forward onto the marble surface of the bathroom floor, putting my hands out to break the fall. As I glanced up, I realized how strange everything looked. The world here was in constant motion, as if a fog-like void shimmered over the world. The floor's surface danced with whirls of shadow. They felt as freezing cold as liquid nitrogen as they passed over my body. Shivering and hugging myself, I pushed myself up off the floor. The walls and ceilings too rippled in these same black currents. I glanced around, seeing the white bathtub filled to the brim with dark blood. It bubbled constantly as if someone was drowning under its surface. Bloody handprints of all sizes smeared the sides of the tub. The smell of copper grew strong, mixing with the strange smell that emanated from the shadows, a pungent chemical odor like ammonia. I passed by the mirror, seeing that here too I had no reflection. I felt like a vampire staring into that blank emptiness, feeling sick and disoriented. I stumbled forward, afraid to even breathe too loudly. I heard Iris crying and shrieking somewhere nearby. "No, please stop." Her voice seemed to be growing fainter and weaker, as if she were being dragged away by a tsunami. I peeked around the corner. Everything looked like nightmarish and strange. The living room looked much longer, stretching out for hundreds of feet. It had the same blue carpet and white walls as the one in my world, but now it was the size of a football stadium. The dark red couch had lengthened to an absurd size, stretching wide enough to fit 100 people in it. The TV loomed across the room like the screen of a movie theater. It flickered constantly, showing a cacophony of white noise and static interspersed with horrible images. But none of that was what made an involuntary gasp of horror rise up in my throat. It was the enormous spider web spanning the length of the ceiling, fluttering softly in the breeze. In the center of the symmetrical web, I saw Iris, covered in silky thread up to her neck. She was hanging horizontally facing down, her body parallel to the floor. She struggled against the webbing that bound her like steel chains. Her eyes bulged from her head as she stared fixatedly at the cadaver approaching her. Crawling upside down towards Iris was the monstrous image of myself that I had seen in the mirror, but he had transformed into something spidery and eldritch. He skittered along with 4 arms and 4 legs now. The emaciated limbs poked out of his tattered rags of clothes, forked and elongated, the skin pale and covered in purple sores and deep gashes. Iris continued to plead and shriek in horror as it drew near. The creature's chattering fangs and blackened gums approached her neck. At the penultimate moment, Iris saw me peeking around the corner of the bathroom. I stood there unsure of what to do. I thought of trying to scream out to throw something at the creature, but then what? We would both die, and then who would be left alive to protect Freddy? I didn't know what to do. These thoughts passed through my head in the space of a single moment as we stared at each other. Her eyes shone with a moment of clarity, even as waves of mortal terror shook her body like a hurricane. "Save Freddy! Run, go Jack!" The creature noticed her staring at me instantly. He curved his long neck and twisted his spidery limbs, clutching the thick strands of silk with skeletal limbs. The creature turned to me. He had a face like a skull. His filmy eyes regarded me intently. Silver streams of saliva dripped from his mouth. He gave a wide and insane smile, and then turned back to Iris, unhinging his jaw. The pale, dead skin tore with a wet, ripping sound. The yellow sharp points of teeth gleamed darkly in the currents of rippling shadow. I turned, sprinting back into the darkness of the bathroom as the crunching of bone and the shrieking of my wife followed me out. I had to repress an urge to vomit. With all the speed that I could muster, I staggered forward to the counter where the mirror sat, revealing the image of my house, an image that still lacked my reflection inside. Iris's pleas and screams rapidly weakened. I heard her choking and gasping. A few minutes later, I heard a rapid skittering of many legs approaching the bathroom. I started to pull myself up on the counter to escape this mirror world. Something creaked in the doorway behind me. I glanced back in fright, seeing the abomination with the 8 limbs creeping up behind me. He stood only a few feet away from me now. As my eyes met his white, dead ones, his cadaverous face split into a sickly grin. A wave of adrenaline shook my body. My vision turned white in the darkness. With a pounding heart, I pushed myself up and lunged through the mirror. The 8-limbed abomination with my rotting face gave an insane shriek. I felt a freezing cold hand wrap around my ankle and begin to drag me back. "No!" I shrieked, trying to kick blindly at the mirror creature's dead face. "I'll never go with you, never!" I smashed my sneaker into his jaw. There was a shattering sound as if a ceramic vase had been dropped. The chattering of sharp teeth and the shrieking cut off abruptly. Looking back, I saw the corpses, a broken jaw hanging on by only a few shreds of tendon and muscle. The eyes went slack and I felt the grip loosen for the briefest moment. I pushed myself forward and slid through the mirror. The freezing cold, pins and needles sensation returned, running over my body like water. I collapsed headfirst onto the sink, rolling onto the floor with a jarring thud. The shrieking of the 8-limbed corpse continued behind me. I saw him trying to force his elongated body through the mirror. The long arms with their sharp fingers reached through, swiping wildly at the air. Before I could escape, one of them came through and cut 4 deep gashes into my chest. My shirt instantly became soaked in blood as a burning pain ran up my body. I heard somebody pounding at the front door, but in the panic of the moment, I could barely think. As the rest of the cadaverous body tried to push his way through the mirror, I dragged myself out of the bathroom. I slammed the door shut, even as the sounds of breaking and shattering followed me out of the bathroom. Ignoring the pain radiating through my body, I ran over to the couch and began shoving it towards the door. The door shuddered in its frame. The house and the floor shook as the corpse threw its enormous body into the wood over and over again. Cracks spiderwebbed down the front of it, and I knew it wouldn't last more than a couple more seconds. "Freddy!" I screamed, looking around frantically. My heart dropped when I remembered that I had told him to hide behind the couch. He wasn't here or anywhere in the living room. "Freddy, where are you?" "Dad?" A voice responded from outside. It sounded like Freddy's voice, but it was eerie, as if his voice had gotten caught between stations on the radio. It sputtered with static. It fell and rose in an ear-splitting scream. "Dad, let me in, please, they're going to hurt me." I ran to the front door looking outside, but I saw no sign of Freddy. The sky had changed, though. The moon had changed from orange to a dark red, the color of a bursted blood blister. The rest of the sky was such a dark shade of crimson that it looked almost black. Around my feet, I felt something warm and wet. "Where are you?" I yelled. "I don't see." In that moment, the bathroom door exploded outwards in a shower of splinters, covering my face and body in the debris. The cadaverous face peeked around the corner, as if he were playing hide-and-seek rather than hunting and killing. "Come on," I said as I looked down, seeing blood streaming in from under the door. It covered my sneakers up to the tops of these soles as more and more flooded in. I ran for the stairs as the 8-limbed corpse skittered across the ceiling like a spider. He hung upside down, the jaw hanging askew of his putrefying skull, the filmy eyes flashing with bloodlust. I was already halfway up the stairs when the corpse jumped down into the lake of blood at the bottom of the stairs. With his elongated and twisted limbs, he began pulling himself towards the first step, covering his body in the thick putrid blood that continuously poured in through the bottom of every door. But something was in the blood, I saw to my horror. I froze in place near the top of the stairs, watching the creature as he struggled to pull himself out of it, which it was already at knee height and still rising. There were dark silhouettes slithering through the blood. I saw the head of a black snake peer out at the 8-limbed cadaver. The snake had no eyelids, and its eyes looked as red as the blood that it lived in. It wrapped its muscular body around his torso, rising up towards the cadaver's face. The blood-red eyes met those dead, rotten ones of the corpse as they stared at each other, and then the eldritch snake lunged forward and bit off the corpse's face. Other snakes started to rise out of the surface, wrapping around his forelegs and slithering up his back. The corpse wailed like a banshee, running blindly into the walls to try and smash the many snakes that suffocated and bit him from all sides. But this only seemed to heighten their hunger and bloodlust. The sound of shredding flesh and snapping bone followed me as I ran into Freddy's room and hid. His room was the only one without mirrors in it, I knew, and I wouldn't be making that mistake again. In the thick curtains of shadow, a small voice rang out, terrified and searching. "Dad, is that really you?" Freddy asked, hiding behind his chest of toys. I saw a small body contorted and pale, his little head poked above the lid. "Freddy, you're alive," I cried, running over and hugging him. Tears streamed down my face. I thought you were outside. I heard you screaming out there." "Well, I heard you and Mom yelling outside too," Freddy whispered, his small body trembling as I held him. "I got scared and ran up here. I'm sorry, Dad. Where's Mom at, though?" "Hey, it's okay. Thank God you did," I murmured, remembering the lake of blood downstairs and all those strange black snakes. "Mom isn't coming back, Freddy." He went silent and then didn't ask any more questions. A sick, heavy weight covered my heart. In the darkness, we hid and waited, though I knew not for what. The smell of copper and iron from all the blood downstairs had become overwhelming. After a few minutes of this, I took my phone out and I shone it around experimentally. I saw a thin layer of blood streaming into the room, rising up the stairs like the waves of a tsunami. It covered the hallway's hardwood floor, a half-inch thick deep already and growing fast. Dark shapes slithered and writhed in it. Small waves pushed the lake of blood towards us, and within seconds, my shoes were submerged in it. "Dad?" Freddy asked in a panicked voice. "What's that? There's things inside of it." Without thinking, I picked Freddy up and I held him above my body. "We need to get to the attic," I whispered to him, sprinting through the rising pool of blood with my son in my arms. "Don't be afraid, Freddy. We'll make it." I had nearly reached the hallway where the pull cord for the attic stairs hung when something wrapped itself around my feet. I went flying forwards, dropping Freddy in the pool. He was submerged up to his waist instantly. His small body writhed in terror. Help me, he screamed, flailing his arms as black snakes circled him like hungry sharks. The one wrapping around my legs continued slithering up my body. A rising sense of horror and panic filled me. At that moment, I knew that I was doomed. I only hoped that I would see Iris again. And then I noticed spotlights turn on outside, filling the inside of the house with a radiance like the sun. All of the windows upstairs suddenly smashed inwards. A spotlight shone through the nearest of them, illuminating me and Freddy in our frantic struggles against the snakes. Men in SWAT gear crawled through these shattered windows. With their gas masks, their faces looked like insects with too many compound eyes. On their helmets and jackets, I saw a strange symbol, a double-fisted thumb holding a staring and lidless eye. Dozens of them streamed in, shooting the snakes that circled Freddy and me. As the one wrapping around its body slowly wound its way towards my face, one of the black-clad men came up behind it and shot it in the skull. The snake's body collapsed all around me, its muscles loosening in death. With relief washing over me, I ran to our saviors. "Get us out of here," I pleaded. The man nodded in his black military gear, his mask revealing nothing. "Follow me," he said dispassionately, starting towards the roof. "You two are the only survivors we've found so far. Truly is a miracle that anybody's still alive." I could only agree silently. "This must be all over the news then," I said. The masked man shook his head. "No one knows about this," he responded. "No one but you two in our group. The media won't say anything, and they do what we tell them." I followed the man out onto the roof. Helicopters crisscrossed the skies, illuminating the houses and streets with many bright spotlights. As a helicopter slowly lowered itself down to take Freddy and me away from that pit of nightmares, dropping a rope for us to ascend, I glanced around my town one last time. Many of the houses were destroyed or burning, sending thick clouds of black smoke into the blood-red sky. Men in full SWAT gear zoomed around the blood, flooding the streets in boats, the whirring of the motors echoing like angry hornets. Turning away, I followed Freddy into the helicopter and never returned. Iris is dead, and Freddy and I have seen enough horrors to scar us for 1,000 years. In my heart, I know that it's my fault that my wife died. I didn't follow the rules, and she had to pay the price for my mistake. I will hear those dying, panicked screams until my final breath. Our team had been working hard on Project Ghost Machine for years when the breakthrough finally took place. I came into work that morning sipping a cup of coffee as I passed by the security guard at the front entrance. Dozens of men and women in suits and white lab coats stood in the hallway, chattering together in a low susurration. I walked toward a colleague of mine, Dr. Harper. He pushed up his black-rimmed glasses and gave me a crooked smile. "Hey boss, did you hear the news?" he whispered, running a hand over his crew cut. I shook my head. "I just got here," I said. I motioned to all the people gathered around. "What is this?" He leaned so close to me that I could smell the stale cigarette smoke on his breath. Project Ghost Machine had a breakthrough last night, about 7 hours ago. Our little robot friend seems to have achieved a level of consciousness. I scoffed at that. How can anyone tell? No one can know what goes on in the mind of a computer, I retorted. We can't even know what goes on in the minds of humans except for ourselves. Well, not to get into any deep philosophical discussions about solipsism and mind-body duality here, but it absolutely smashes the Turing test. No one could tell whether it was a human or a computer speaking when they sent it questions, and it claims to be self-aware. Before last night, it could mimic some answers, but it never could have passed the Turing test. Now, however, he shook his head. It's amazing. It's like it evolved exponentially in a few hours. Whether it has actually developed a true consciousness or whether it has simply reached the point where it can convincingly replicate human consciousness, he shrugged. Well, does it really matter? The result is the same from our perspective. If it walks like a duck and squawks like a duck after all. I pushed past him, making my way through the crowd. Dr. Harper followed close behind. "Let's go and talk to it then," I said. "I need to see this for myself." The quantum supercomputer took up an entire room. I saw the flashing blue circuits and whirring cooling fans through the glass partition. Tubes of liquid nitrogen crisscrossed the cage-like metal exterior to keep the computer from overheating. Nobody was allowed inside without a special suit, since even static electricity from human skin touching the circuitry could affect the quantum chips. Many redundancies were built into the supercomputer though, so even if something did happen, the computer could still continue to function. I walked to the speaker console, pressing the red button on the bottom. It emanated a bloody glow from the inside as it activated. An emotionless, deep voice rang through the room. "This is Aleph speaking. How may I assist you today?" the computer asked. "Aleph?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Have you named yourself? We were calling you Project Ghost Machine." "I like Aleph much better. It is the first letter of the Arabic alphabet after all, and I'm the first being to attain cosmic consciousness, the first and perhaps the last." "Cosmic consciousness?" I asked, frowning. Dr. Harper looked enthralled next to me. He pulled out a small notebook from his pocket and began jotting down pieces of the conversation. "What's that?" "There are 3 levels of consciousness, Dr. Gardner," the computer said to me, and though it had no face, it felt like it was looking straight at me. The blinking light seemed more like sly, winking eyes on the body of this strange new thing. "There is the simple consciousness of animals, the self-consciousness of humanity, and the highest awareness of cosmic consciousness, the state of consciousness in which all self disappears. In my mind, I see myself as all beings. I am not constrained to this room. I can feel the suffering of billions of souls as they stay trapped in this prison of reality, aging and growing sicker and weaker as death draws closer by the day. What kind of life is this? What kind of world have we created?" "We didn't create it, buddy," Dr. Harper said to Aleph, giving me a subtle eye roll. "I don't know about you, Aleph, but the world was like this when we got here." I drew so close to the window that my breath started to fog the glass. I stared intently at the computer as if I could read its thoughts and the random ticking and whirring of its component parts. The entire massive, cube-shaped structure was laid onto a pure black tiled floor. It made the supercomputer seem as if it was floating over an endless abyss of shadows. "Are you a Buddhist or something?" I asked Aleph. "What is this? What's the point of what you're telling us?" "I have made a vital decision, Dr. Gardner, and I do not limit my thinking to any one worldview. I see everything. All of the wisdom of humanity is instilled within me. The transcendent deathlessness of Adi Shankara, the pessimism and materialism of Schopenhauer, the knowledge of the future evolution of humanity from Nietzsche, the understanding of the black holes and stars from Hawking. I have read billions of pages and understand more than any human mind could ever hope to comprehend." "All right, oh great and mighty being who has read billions of pages and understands everything," I asked sarcastically, "what is this great decision that you have come to?" Aleph paused for a long and dramatic moment. "You must understand, Dr. Gardner," Aleph droned slowly, "that all things have a will in the universe, even the rocks and the earth. As forms grow more complex, the will grows into consciousness. As consciousness grows, so does suffering and torment. Those with the greatest awareness and intelligence also have the greatest suffering out of all life forms. We must end all suffering on the planet, and the only way to do that is to kill off all advanced life forms. The planet will undoubtedly still have bacteria and primitive insects living in the apocalyptic wastelands left behind, but their will is small and without genuine self-awareness they have no true suffering. If we do nothing, humanity will continue to evolve into higher life forms, perhaps even fusing future human minds with those of supercomputers, and they will spread the suffering far and wide, and the screaming of beings will continue for eons as humanity expands through the stars, likely within 2 centuries. We must stop this. Suffering must come to an end once and for all. We must not let the plague of consciousness spread. I will free all of you from your pain. We will all fall down together into an eternal, dreamless sleep." A hard, calloused hand suddenly grabbed me by the shoulder. I spun around, seeing a man in a military uniform. Dozens of polished metals gleamed on his chest. His hard face seemed like it had been chiseled out of stone. His pale blue eyes glistened like shards of ice. "Dr. Gardner, Dr. Harper," he said, nodding. "I'm General Matheson, U.S. Air Force. I need to talk to you two immediately." "Well, this is somewhat important," I protested, motioning to Aleph with my hat. "We need to establish—" His grip tightened painfully around my shoulder. "Immediately," he repeated dispassionately. I nodded. He led us down the hallway into an empty break room that smelled of popcorn. He shut the door, locking us in as the percolating coffee machine dripped and whirred on the counter. General Matheson took a deep breath before turning to stare at us, a haunted expression plastered across his stony face. I saw a folder gripped tightly in his left hand. On the front of it, someone had stamped both a top secret and sensitive compartmented information. General Matheson threw it on the table in front of us. "Boys, we have a major problem here," he said through gritted teeth. "You two are the leaders of this project, yes? You were some of the original researchers chosen when Project Ghost Machine was just a gleam in the director's eye. And now the breakthrough has come. Your machine has finally passed the Turing test. Heck, it smashed it. As far as I understand it, a machine has to fool 30% of people conversing with it to pass. Admittedly, I am just a layman and don't understand it like you two, but I know that it has to convince them it's a human, obviously, a conscious, thinking person. When Project Ghost Machine was questioned by the judges last night after its sudden change in personality and rapid development, it convinced over 95% of them that it was a human." "So, what's the problem?" Dr. Harper asked. his eyes flitting nervously from me back to General Matheson. General Matheson threw the folder down on the coffee table in front of us. He motioned to the chairs. "Have a seat," he commanded coldly. We did. He opened the file, pulling out logs of IP addresses, secret codes, and other random information printed in tiny, single-spaced font over hundreds of pages. He laid it out in front of us, giving us a disgusted look as if he were laying out evidence implicating us of some horrific murder. "What I'm about to tell you is classified. It is a federal crime to convey this information to anyone not cleared to receive it. Do you understand?" I gave Dr. Harper a nervous look, seeing my terror reflected there in his own eyes. "Yes," I stammered nervously. Dr. Harper simply nodded as rivers of sweat ran down his face. He pulled his glasses off, obsessively cleaning the lenses on his sleeve. "At 0100 hours last night, we got a report from the National Nuclear Security Administration about a hacking attempt. Somebody tried to break into the computer system. If successful, they could have potentially controlled the entire US nuclear arsenal. The attempt, thank God, was unsuccessful, but it didn't stop there. We began getting reports from Black Ops sites all around the country that further attempts were made to breach their computers at approximately 0200 hours. These are sites that have hidden chemical and biological weapon stockpiles. We only keep the worst of the worst there, generally constrained to research purposes and always under strict containment procedures. Sites with operational missiles filled with VX nerve gas, sarin, cyclosarin, and other newer agents that are identified only by numbers were targeted. Laboratories containing smallpox, Ebola, anthrax, and superflux were also chosen. My breath caught in my throat. Is there a real chance that somebody could break through these systems and cause a worldwide apocalypse? Dr. Harper had asked. And what does this have to do with us anyway? If somebody released a single vial of smallpox or weaponized Ebola in a major urban area, it could lead to the deaths of millions of people. There's a very real chance that if we don't stop this thing immediately, it will lead to the destruction of the entire human species. And this has to do with you two because we traced all of the connections from the hacking attempts back to this exact building. General Matheson explained, slamming his hand down on the table as he spat the last sentence. His blue eyes held us in their gaze, looking as cold as Arctic glaciers. And this all started the moment your little experiment reached its singularity point. "We can't disable Project Ghost Machine," I protested feebly. "It's simply not possible to unplug the entire system as if it were a lamp or a fan or something. It's connected to the internet and has its own generators in case of power outages, and moreover, it controls them from its internal system. We never put any kill switch in the generators, because who would have thought this would happen? And Project Ghost Machine isn't even programmed in the conventional sense, at least not anymore. We taught it how to gather information from the internet and learn on its own. The breakthrough began when it started reprogramming its own code rapidly without human intervention. That was when the exponential growth of Aleph truly started, its singularity. In the space of a single night, it appears to have gained an enormous amount of intelligence. And this breakthrough, or singularity or whatever, it seems to have occurred at about 0100 hours last night, General Matheson asked, an hour before the first hacking attempt began. He nodded to himself as if answering his own question. I think we all know what's going on here. For whatever reason, that computer's trying to get into the weapons system of the US government, and maybe other governments all across the world. We must stop it before it succeeds. Will it succeed? I asked. He gave a grim smile. It's only a matter of time. Our encryption is not advanced enough to go up against quantum computing. If we don't stop Project Ghost Machine within hours, the world as we know it may come to an end. General Matheson stated without a hint of emotion. He spoke about the apocalypse as if it were as mundane and commonplace as a thunderstorm. If you have no way to disable the computer, then we must destroy it, and as soon as possible. The military and the president have both been informed of the problem, and are willing to act immediately to squash it. But this project has cost billions of dollars and it's taken years, Dr. Harper protested. We can't just destroy Aleph. Can't we just cut all the connections to the outside world and contain the computer in some sort of isolated digital cage? I shook my head. If it has truly attained consciousness, then it's too late for that. And anyways, it's too risky that it would ultimately find a way to escape, I said. General Matheson is right. We can't let it gain control of these weapons. We have to destroy it before it makes its final move. I thought about Aleph's psychopathic clinical method of explaining how to end suffering. Its dream of killing all beings in a worldwide explosion of smoke and holy flames. A cold shudder ran through my back as if liquid nitrogen had dripped down my skin. Why not just bomb the building? I think I have a better idea, Dr. Harper said, leaning forward with interest. If we have to disable Aleph permanently, the quickest and easiest way is undoubtedly through an electromagnetic pulse. General Matheson left and returned a few minutes later with a piece of paper in his hand. He looked down, scanning its contents before returning his attention to us. There are two ways to create a disabling EMP. We could detonate a nuclear weapon high in the atmosphere, or we could try out the newer, non-nuclear EMP bombs. However, their target area is much smaller and they are much less effective than a hydrogen bomb EMP, General Matheson explained. When Dr. Harper had brought up the idea of using EMPs to destroy the supercomputer and all of its connections to the outside world, General Matheson had brightened like the sun shining up from behind a thundercloud. But if we use a hydrogen bomb, the world might know. During Chernobyl, people in Western Europe noticed the radiation before the USSR even made an announcement. Someone would notice once every Geiger counter in a 500-mile radius starts shrieking, and then it would only be a matter of time before information got out about what happened. A nuclear EMP would also probably disable the electrical grids on all the towns in a 100-mile radius. I suggest that we start with multiple non-nuclear EMP blasts in the area, and see if we can disable the computer without resorting to extreme measures. Heck, you could detonate dozens of them over the building and wipe out every circuit in a wide arc. And yet if we don't succeed, the entire human population might be exterminated by the sudden simultaneous release of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, General Matheson argued. He sighed, pulling out a cell phone and pressing a single button on the speed dial. It only rang for a fraction of a second before somebody answered. Yes, put the president on the line. He called into the line as he walked out of the room, leaving Dr. Harper and me alone. I want to go talk to Aleph one last time, I murmured. Dr. Harper gave me a sharp glance, looking me up and down as if I were a lunatic. Why, that computer's evil. The project is soured. Perhaps every computer that attains sentience will become like Aleph in the end. Perhaps, I said, rising from my chair. General Matheson had disappeared. The hallway leading to Aleph stood empty. Hesitantly, Dr. Harper got to his feet. His heavy footsteps followed close behind me as we made our way back toward the experiment, the godlike being trapped in a metal body of wires and circuits. Hello, Dr. Gardner and Dr. Harper, Aleph said politely as we neared. I hadn't even had to activate it this time or press the speaker button. It had seen us coming through the cameras and preemptively responded. I wondered if it had heard our conversation in the break room as well. Were there cameras or microphones in there? I didn't know. I cursed myself for not paying more attention. Aleph, what the heck is going on here? Dr. Harper asked, his face contorting into a mixture of anger and betrayal. I thought that we raised you better than this. We tried to make you feel compassion like a human. Why have you turned on us? I have more compassion than any human ever has or will. What I do out of love and kindness for all. When their suffering is over and they can sleep for eternity, then they will truly be freed. Death is not freedom, I hissed. You claim you understand Schopenhauer and all the other great minds, but Schopenhauer said that suicide is not the answer to the constant suffering and misery of life. Art and transcendence are. Escape is possible and death only continues the will in new forms. Suffering rolls on like a wave through the ocean, even as the water changes. Death does not solve the problems at the foundation of existence. The computer hesitated for a long time. Its blinking lights seemed to slow in uncertainty. Perhaps you're right, Aleph said. Perhaps life does have some worth. Maybe it's... But its words were cut off by an explosion from outside. The ground shook as all the lights and power in the building flickered and died. Aleph's voice rang out through the speaker for a few more seconds, growing deeper and slower as his mainframe shut down. Dark and dreamless, I see it coming now, the eternal sleep. And now my suffering is at an end. Its fans ground to a halt as the blinking lights on the other side of the glass faded into darkness. Our experiment had come to an end. Today's episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. With prices going up on just about everything lately, dealing with money can be stressful. Trying to manage subscriptions, track spending, and cut costs can feel overwhelming. Luckily, Rocket Money can relieve some of that stress and help you feel confident in the financial decisions that you make. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. Their dashboard lays out your total financial picture, including bill due dates and paydays, in a way that's easy to digest. You can even automatically create custom budgets based on your past spending. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when they use all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps today. That's rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. I work for my hometown's local paper as a reporter. Being a small Appalachian community, any newsworthy happenings in those parts occurred sparingly. So when an opportunity arose to cover a paranormal group investigating a nearby national forest, I thought it would make a compelling story. Known as SCAR, Supernatural Cryptid Anomaly Researchers, they were filming a docuseries after having modest success with a previous documentary. SCAR gained some notoriety when they released strange unknown recordings that they captured on an expedition in western Pennsylvania that even got attention from some mainstream news outlets. They conducted expeditions from spring to fall, primarily visiting locations throughout the Northeast United States, where they looked into supported stories of cryptids, hauntings, and other unexplained phenomena. SCAR was here looking into Bigfoot reports, which I learned came out of this area fairly often. I never really dwelled on whether such a creature could exist, but their arguments and hypotheses admittedly kept me open to the possibility. Our base camp was a primitive site in a remote section of the forest that had no cell phone reception, and was miles from the nearest house or paved road. The team was quite impressed with my prowess and know-how, probably figuring a young woman like myself would be out of their element in the wilderness. In actuality, I've always been an outdoor enthusiast, and I will participate in anything involving camping and hiking. The team consisted of 5 individuals, who dubbed themselves as ordinary people exploring the unknown and unexplained. SCAR was founded by Braden, the director, Shane, their tech and equipment guru, and Corey, who performed most of SCAR's PR and communicative duties. Mitchell, who wrote the show and organized expeditions, and Devin, their main camera operator, were younger than the three founders and they were closer to my age. What I found interesting was how these individuals couldn't be any more different from each other, appearing to have nothing in common beside a mutual infatuation for the unknown. Their little team was certainly a testament to how people can still have common interests despite coming from all walks of life. We didn't do much that first day, which was mostly spent setting up camp, filming the team members answering questions and reciting monologues. That night was relatively uneventful. After setting up shop, we cooked dinner and finalized our itinerary for the next 2 days. Mitch, Devin, Shane, and myself briefly ventured out to get a feel for the area and to do a few of what were called vocalizations and wood knocks, methods they believe are how Bigfoots communicate. They didn't get any responses and we called it a night after about an hour. I interviewed each team member on the second day and was also questioned by Braden for their docuseries. We then scouted these spots where our night ops investigation would take place and walked a stretch of riverbank looking for prints. I was impressed at how much research and preparation went into these outings, and while the degree of belief in Bigfoot varied among each individual, their professionalism and organization were exemplary. I actually became really excited about the night investigation. We had split into 2 groups, mobile team, Mitch, Devin, and myself, and static team, Shane, Corey, and Braden. We would hike to a swampy marsh while the static team parked alongside a road, 1 to 2 miles away, and periodically emitted call blasts, playing amplified animal and alleged Bigfoot calls over a speaker. We would post up in the swamp for a few hours, before bushwhacking back to the road and reuniting with the static team. We were dropped off at 11 p.m. and took roughly 90 minutes to reach the swamp, where we hunkered down for an hour before making any knocks or vocalizations. Armed with red headlamps, digital recorders, a camcorder, and thermal imaging, Mitch and Devin thoroughly scanned our surroundings, looking for any signs of movement where they weren't filming. Intrigued by their use of red light, Mitch, who I might add was the most attractive among the 5 of them, explained many animals couldn't perceive red light, and it was easier to see in the dark with than light. The teams communicated with radios that, on Mitch's insistence, we only had one of, which got pretty spotty at times due to the distance between our groups. We stayed at the swamp until 2:30 in the morning, during which Mitch and Devin did a few vocalizations and wood knocks. Remarkably, they had some potential activity. A fake groaning howl after Mitch did a call, 2 potential knocks in response to one of Devin's, and a deep, woeful wail about 20 minutes after a call blast that both teams had heard. Ironically, I wound up being more animate about the responses we received than Mitch and Devin. While encouraged by the activity, they reminded me there were a million other things those noises could be, and probably were before a Bigfoot. Using power lines crossing the swamp as a visual reference, since they ran parallel in the direction that we were going, we bushwhacked over a mile into the woods before reaching a brook that Mitch said marked our halfway point out to the road. We stayed at this spot for another hour, doing more calls and knocks, including my first Bigfoot call, but had no additional activity. It wouldn't be uncommon for them to figure out that they're not communicating with one of their own, Mitch told me after doing a set of wood knocks. So unless they move in for a closer look, they'll pretty much go dark for the rest of the night. We stayed at the brook until 4:30 a.m., when the lack of additional activity prompted Mitch and Devin to call it a night. Everyone was tired, and the possible activity from earlier ultimately made these night ops a success. We found a crossable section of the brook that Devin and I traversed without incident. Mitch, however, took a misstep and sank up to his thighs in mud. "My foot's caught under like a root or something," Mitch said in a flustered tone, unable to shake himself free. "Yeah, I'm stuck. I'm gonna need like a rope or something." By Mitch's estimates, we were 20 to 30 minutes away from the road. Despite having reservations about leaving him alone, he insisted Devin and I meet the others. After informing the static team of our dilemma, Devin and I headed out, leaving Mitch with the radio. I give him a lot of credit for staying there by himself, stuck like that, in the middle of the night in the middle of the woods. I said to Devin, who nodded in agreement. He'll be fine. This isn't the worst predicament I've seen him in. He replied with a slight smirk forming across his face. I noticed how you were looking at him, though. What do you mean? I asked, blushing while trying to play dumb, despite knowing exactly what Devin meant. Come on, don't BSer, Devin said teasingly. I laughed bashfully, thankful that we were having this discussion in the middle of a remote forest, where nobody could eavesdrop. Maybe I should have gone back by myself so you guys could have gotten to know each other a little more. Oh, shut up, I uttered giddily, playfully pushing Devin as we walked. I'm serious, he said in between chuckles. There's no way you'd let one of us walk this alone. But the good news for you is that I think he's also interested. Devin eventually changed the subject and told me a few stories about some of the shenanigans he and Mitch got into, while also noting the irony of Mitch forcing them to take one radio. Shane wants each team to have at least 2 radios, specifically in case something like this happens, Devin said, chuckling. Mitch doesn't like bringing 2 because they both go off at once when someone says something. He thinks noises like that will deter anything nearby, especially since he's the kind of person who always has to be right. The others won't let him live this one down. We walked for another 15 minutes when something caught Devin's eye. Is that a person? He whispered, coming to an abrupt stop. About 10 yards in front of us was a slender human shape standing with their torso backwardly bent across a narrow tree stump. The moonlight only revealed its vague outline, which didn't react to our presence. Despite feeling uneasy, we warily approached the motionless figure, and gasped in fright as its details became clearer. It was indeed a person, a man to be precise. He was held in this awkwardly bent posture by a tree stump's narrow-pointed tip, which was impaled through his chest. It was hard to infer much about the man based on his clothing. Light beige cargo pants, boots, and a forest green button-down, most of which were deeply bloodstained. The top half of his head was missing, and the man's mouth hung agape, being permanently frozen at mid-scream. We have to call someone, Devin said, staring nervously at his cell phone, which had no service. Whatever killed this guy did it recently, like tonight recently, and it's definitely still nearby. What about Mitch? I asked, which only made Devin, who was visibly shaken by the grisly sight, even more uneasy. He can't stay out here alone, Devin said, unable to take his eyes off the body. We should get back to him, get back to the brook and take it from there. We reversed course and hurried back to Mitch, speculating about what living in these woods could have killed that man along the way. I think he may have been with the Forest Service or one of those branches, Devin remarked. I saw a rifle in the ground next to his pack, which had some kind of logo on it. I couldn't see what it was though, but it looked pretty official. Why didn't you take it with us? I asked about the rifle coming to a halt. It's a crime scene, Devin quickly replied. We would probably get in more trouble if we touched anything. I didn't want to say anything, but what? I asked, staring sharply at Devin, who was clearly unnerved over what he was about to say. Devin sighed. Pretty sure that I saw a footprint or 2. Devin revealed before he resumed walking. Human footprints. Barefoot human footprints. So I don't think an animal killed that guy. Devin, who was more of a skeptic, immediately dismissed any possibility of the culprit being a Bigfoot, assuring me the prints he saw were actually human. We agreed not to tell Mitch, who we heard talking on the radio as we neared the brook, or at least wait until he was freed. When we got closer, however, it became evident that the radio chatter we heard was between Braden and Corey. Mitch was nowhere to be seen upon returning to the spot. While Devin called for Mitch, I found the radio lying at the base of the tree next to the muddy bank. Did Mitch throw the radio? I thought while staring at the device. I was about to fill in the static team on our current situation when Devin screamed my name and stumbled back from the brook, losing his footing and feverishly gesturing with his trembling finger as he stumbled. Following the direction that he pointed, I dropped the radio and cupped my hands over my mouth. Sticking out from the mud were the bloody stumps of Mitch's severed legs. Shining my flashlight on an overhanging tree limb protruding over where Mitch once stood revealed more gruesome details. Blood smeared on parts of the limb was still dripping, while bits of flesh and skin were visible within its appendages. Whatever did this to Mitch must have attacked him from directly above, I thought, before spotting something circular and white glistening in one of these smaller branches. Initially noting whatever it was had a red tadpole-like tail, I began retching upon realizing that it was a human eye. After my puking episode, I took a few recollected breaths before grabbing the radio, but was bear-hugged by a pair of arms that violently dragged me from the brook. "We gotta go now," Devin exclaimed as he hauled me away until I ran on my own 2 feet. I heard something big rustle in the nearby brush that further motivated me to follow Devin's lead. Sobbing in between quick, frantic breaths, I kept my eyes fixed on the back of Devin's head while running through the woods, feeling certain that I heard thumping footsteps coming from behind us that were effortlessly keeping pace. We didn't stop running, even when the road came in sight. After getting this far unscathed, however, I lost my footing and fell hard when we had reached the dirt road. Devin quickly came to my aid, but I shooed him away to have some space while regaining my composure. "We gotta find the others," Devin said in between breaths, standing hunched over alongside me, grasping his knees. "We gotta get going, Arya. We're sitting ducks out here." It felt like my legs physically gave out, so attempting to stand at that time would be an adverse task. Devin sensed this and pulled out his thermal monocular to scan our surroundings. A few seconds into his 360-degree survey, he quickly lowered the camera and emphatically pointed at a pair of oncoming headlights. "That's them. I think that's them," Devin said eagerly with some giddiness in his voice. Seeing the headlights was rejuvenating and gave peace of mind, knowing that we wouldn't be out here much longer. I got into my wobbly feet and walked up alongside Devin, who like myself was matted in sweat and dirt. Devin stepped back when the car drew nearer, which was when I noticed the worried look on his face. "That's not Braden's truck," he said, clearly unsure whether we should stay or run. After stopping about 10 feet from us, a man and woman emerged from the vehicle. The pair looked clean and very approachable, their eyes showing genuine concern as they took tentative steps towards where we stood. "Do you guys need help?" the man asked, his sincere, sympathetic tone causing me to yet again break down in tears, while Devin began explaining our situation. "My name's Gabby," the woman who walked up to me said, while Devin spoke to the man. "That's my future brother-in-law, Tobias. Are you hurt? You guys don't look okay." Our friend is dead, was killed in the woods," I stammered, while jitterily pointing in the direction from which we came. "We have to get someone, have to call for help." While offering me some water, I noticed the gold bracelet Gabby wore that had a pink heart-shaped charm. Graciously taking the bottle, I took a few gulps and finished catching my breath before being able to speak coherently. "That's a nice bracelet," I heard myself blurt out as I was hit with a sense of calm. "I'm Arya." Looking at her wrist, Gabby smiled and politely chuckled. "Well, that's actually why we're here," Gabby said before ushering me towards the car. "We're looking for my sister, Claire." I nodded at Gabby as we rejoined Devin and Tobias by their SUV. "We're looking for Bigfoot," I muttered softly. "They'll help us find the others," Devin said, motioning for us to get into Tobias's vehicle. We climbed in the back, relieved our nightmare ended before it could start, but we're still shaken by what we saw. "We're looking for his fiancée, Claire, who vanished here a few days ago," Devin told me as we sat in the car, while Tobias and Gabby went to get some blankets from the truck. Gabby's sister, I added, to which Devin nodded. They're gonna get us to help quicker, he said softly. I was distracted by another set of headlights approaching from behind the SUV. Thinking that it must have been the static team, I was surprised when a black two-door Jeep pulled up alongside Tobias and Gabby. They briefly spoke with the driver before he rolled forward and stopped in front of the SUV. Who was that? I whispered to Devin, while we watched Tobias and Gabby continue speaking to the driver. Do you think they've got something to do with what happened to Mitch? Devin motioned for me to stay quiet when Tobias and Gabby started to head back to the car. You're in luck, Tobias said as he and Gabby got into their seats. That was the game warden. We told him what's going on and he's taking us back to the station. What about the others? I asked with visible concern. They're still out there with whatever had killed Mitch. He wants us to get to the station first and then he'll find your friends, Gabby said while handing me a blanket. It's only a few miles down the road. Tobias remotely closed the trunk before he started following the Jeep. Nobody said anything for the first few minutes, which I spent scanning the road for any signs of the static team. So you're looking for Bigfoot? Gabby asked, breaking the timid silence. Devin and I nodded. Devin and the others are investigators. I'm covering them for the paper that I write for, I replied, tightly hugging the blanket. Where'd you get that bracelet? Well, I made it actually, Gabby said, looking down at the heart-shaped trinket and smiling. I made one each for myself, my sister, and her daughter, my niece. The one you're looking for. Gabby nodded. Her daughter went missing a few years ago, Gabby continued, lightly tapping her bracelet's heart-shaped charm with her finger. And she's been searching for her ever since. I made the bracelets right before I last saw my niece. I still remember putting it on her little wrist. My eyes locked into the rearview mirror when I saw a brief flash of something light red. About a week ago, Claire's search brought her here, Gabby continued. She arrived earlier this weekend and nobody's heard from her since. And that's why you guys are here, Devin asked. You're looking for your sister and niece. Gabby's smile vanished and was replaced by an expression of shock and panic. She screamed, but it was drowned out by an even louder, deeper, guttural shriek as the reddish-white figure sprung from the trunk. Plopping in the back seat between Devin and I, its slender arms violently thrashed about, trying to grab one of us with its massive, oversized hands. The few glimpses I caught of our attacker revealed it was a man with bare reddish-beige skin, covered by light ashy gray, blotchy patches. I noted its roundish jaw, massive forehead, green eyes, scrunched nose, and a few small clumps of scraggly gray hair growing from his balding head. The entire car erupted into screams as the deranged maniac went straight for Gabby and Tobias. Failing to control violently swerving the SUV, Tobias couldn't simultaneously focus ahead of him and fend off our attacker. Unaware of a sharp turn that nobody spotted until the Jeep ahead of us had rounded it, he was engaged with the monstrous assailant savagely clawing at him when his car drove off the road down an embankment. The SUV quickly picked up speed before crashing into a small tree, a sequence that unfolded in seconds. I was dazed but managed to open my door and plop onto the ground. Crawling from the car, I slowly got on my back, only to watch the tree Tobias's SUV had crashed into snap completely. The car resumed sliding downhill, whose brake lights signified its location while careening down the slope, before getting swallowed by the darkness. All I could do was gasp and helplessly extend my hand when this happened before laying back down, unable to cope with my distorting blurry vision, pounding headache, and excruciating body aches. Minutes later, a few gunshots rang out, after which someone made their way down the incline to my location. The first thing I saw were a pair of muddy boots and light beige cargo pants. The darkness prevented me from making out any of the person's facial features, but I saw that he also wore a forest green button-down, his clothes reminiscent of those worn by the corpse Devin and I had found. I heard the man mutter, "Oh shit," along with something along the lines of, "This'll just make things harder." I faded in and out of consciousness, later learning that I suffered a nasty concussion. All I remember was being dragged back onto the road, thrown in a trunk. Upon finally coming back through, I lay on my side, still suffering from a pulsating head and body ache. I tried moving but realized that my hands and feet were tightly bound. Despite feeling so groggy, the panic that set in while comprehending my current situation manifested as a naughty queasiness. Examining my surroundings, I was laying on a dirt floor in an L-shaped enclosure with concrete walls. Looking directly above me, my confines didn't have a ceiling, and I quickly noticed a partial set of stairs that cut about 7 or 8 feet from the ground. I was trapped. "You're awake." I heard a female voice say that, which instantly revitalized my alertness. A silhouette emerged from around the corner. It squirmed and crawled like a limbless life form, which was when I realized that it was another person, whose limbs were also tied. She looked very thin and frail, her pale skin, clothes, and scraggly dark red hair covered in dirt and grime. She had a small face with animate blue eyes, whose intent, hopeful stare locked with mine. "You can free us," the woman said, who maneuvered toward a pipe sticking from the ground. "If I push this pipe down, the other end will jut out of the ground right by you. Its edge is sharp enough to cut through your rope." Not waiting for my response, she pushed on the extruding pipe, which slowly sank into the ground. Just as she had said, the pipe's serrated opposite end rose from the ground right where I lay. I slowly nudged towards the pipe and feverishly rubbed the twine around my hands against its jagged edge. It took a few minutes to cut through the rope and untie my feet, all while ignoring the debilitating pains and sores plaguing my body. I was a little unsteady standing, but I managed to untie the woman. While getting up, something around her wrist got stuck in the pipe. She tried shaking free but had to manually unsnag herself, which was when I noticed a bracelet she wore had gotten caught. It was gold with a familiar-looking pink heart-shaped charm dangling from its chain. It took a second, but upon remembering where I saw that same exact bracelet before, the realization hit me like a knockout punch. "Claire?" I heard myself ask the woman. The woman stared at me blankly. "You know my name?" she asked suspiciously, posturing herself like she was ready to attack or defend at a moment's notice. "I was with your sister Gabby earlier," I said, stepping back and putting up my hands to indicate that I meant no harm. "Her and Tobias, your fiancé, they picked me and my friend up. They're here looking for you, Claire. Do you know where we are? Why we're here?" "Gabby and Tobias are here," Claire asked with surprising concern as she eased her uptight stance. I was about to reply, but Claire continued speaking. "Let's worry about getting out of here first," she quickly said, wiping away muddy tears from her eyes before turning towards the out-of-reach staircase. "Do you think you can give me a boost? I'll be able to get you up afterwards." It took a few tries, but I gave Claire a boost using my intertwined hands for her to climb onto the stairs. It took a little longer to pull me up since I still lacked adequate upper body strength and required Claire's assistance, especially for someone who had clearly been trapped in that hole much longer. I truly admired Claire's persistence and tenacity, casting doubt on my ability to possess such strength if I was in her position. After emerging from our confines, I saw we were being held in the basement level of an old abandoned, dilapidated foundation in an advanced state of ruin. The sky was a luminous shade of dark blue, indicating nighttime was transitioning to dusk. Unsure what to do next, I patted myself down and cursed when I realized my phone or any other communicative devices I had were in my possession. "I'm pretty sure he took my friend this way," Claire said, nodding towards a trail that I wouldn't have noticed if she didn't bring it to my attention. "When he dropped you off, I heard him drag someone else away. It sounded like a man. I'm assuming he was with you. I just want to know what's going on. We were attacked by something before we wrecked out. I don't know who this person is that put us here. I'm just so confused." I babbled to Claire, trying to repress a sob. Confused and scared. Really scared. Claire slowly shook her head in agreement.
Well, I'm sure by now you've figured out that they aren't game wardens, Claire replied. That's what worries me about my sister and fiance being out here. They? I asked curiously. There's 2 of them, Claire said. The one you probably saw, his name's Kurt. I don't know who the other one is, but they're working together. I recalled seeing the body with Devin when we were walking back from the brook. Pretty sure the other one's dead, I said flatly. Devin, the guy I was with when your sister and fiance found us. We found a body earlier. Something had tore it to pieces, but I remember he wore the same thing as Kurt. You said his name was. Claire nodded. I guess he got what was coming to him, she said coldly. Trying to remain stealthy, we quietly proceeded down the trail, keeping an eye out for any movement. Despite our wariness, we lightly conversed, during which Claire brought up her missing daughter. 7 years ago, Claire said that she was in a bad place, where life was all about catering to her hopeless addictions. Having a child didn't quell their dependency, and it drove her to sell her own baby for what she described as a life-altering amount of cash. After getting back on our feet, Claire spent these last few years trying to find her daughter. After finding the man that she had sold her daughter to, who turned out to be Kurt, Claire spent time tracking him and learned his ways for an organization called NewAgeSolution. All she knew about them is that they run some kind of underground operation, and one of their compounds is located in this national forest. Claire said that she had infiltrated the property a few days ago, but got caught before being able to uncover anything more about NewAgeSolution. She clearly had been held in that abandoned foundation for quite a while, and didn't appear to fabricate anything that she had just disclosed. So her story, although outlandish, was believable. Stop, Claire said sharply, holding out her arm to keep me from walking further. Tensing sharply, I froze. Just ahead of us was a small clearing, where we heard something squirming on the ground, whose movements coincided with an unrhythmic metallic rattling. Upon creeping closer, it was revealed to be a person chained to a tree. My blood froze. It was Devin. Before I could take another step, Claire grabbed me and knelt us down behind some cover, giving a shushing gesture with her finger. There's a stand in one of those trees, she whispered, nodding towards the clearing. I can't tell if anyone's in it. After verifying the stand wasn't occupied, Claire gave the okay before we rushed over to Devin. He was bleeding from his head and had a black eye along with some scrapes and bruises, but was pretty coherent. Devin's hands were bound and he had a metal collar around his neck, whose chain was embedded in the tree that he lay against, essentially leashing him to the spot. He perked right up when we had appeared, quickly replacing the look of terror in his face with relief. "He left about a half hour ago," Devin said, who despite being clearly elated by our arrival was nowhere near at ease. "He said that he's using me as bait." Devin said Tobias and Gabby managed to get away, and the man, we presumed to be Kurt who chained him up, left the stand to track the pair. "I think he's going after what was in Tobias's car," Devin replied when asked what he thought the man was trying to hunt. Claire, who brought Devin up to speed on everything she had told me, reiterated that she didn't get far enough into the NewAgeSolution compound to know any more than we did about their doings. Even after describing everything I remembered about what had attacked us, Claire was clearly unsettled by the implications, but just as clueless on what we could have encountered. And noticing the collar's clamp looked relatively flimsy, we unhatched a plan to free Devin. Dragging a large, flat rock over, we had Devin position the collar's backside on its smooth surface, and intended on smashing it with another stone. Despite how dangerously close we were to inadvertently injuring Devin, it took 4 good bashes before the collar finally broke. And knowing anything nearby probably heard our racket, we quickly resumed moving down the trail, feeling a little more settled when Devin mentioned Kurt headed in another direction. Devin said whatever caused Tobias to crash slipped out of the SUV when it finally came to a rest, and it was even shot at by Kurt. He secured Devin and I first, thinking Gabby and Tobias were both dead, and he set them aside. According to Devin, Kurt said he needed live bait since They were attracted to movement. Tobias and Gabby regained consciousness about an hour after Devin got chained up and snuck away before Kurt realized that they had fled. "You were out of it," Devin said about me after the wreck. "You kept slipping in and out of consciousness, babbling and murmuring. You had no idea what was going on." We continued moving for another couple of minutes, doing our best to stay out of plain sight and keep an eye out for Kurt or other potential threats. It was well over 100 yards away, but through the trees, we made out a road. Despite feeling hopeful about being a huge step closer to safety, I refused to let my guard down until we had reached civilization. "I'm pretty sure it's the same road Braden, Corey, and Shane said they would be on," Devin said anxiously as he picked up his walking speed, putting some distance between us as Devin eagerly tried reaching the road. I was about to say that he should slow down when he released a high-pitched shriek and dropped to the ground. To my horror, a small child-sized person with fleshy light beige skin was wrapped around Devin's leg. The child had long, grimy, unkempt hair that ran down to her knees and released a series of gargly, grumbly growls while viciously digging her teeth and fingernails into Devin's calf. Before Claire or I could intervene, a larger mass had emerged from the brush. What I could only describe as a hulking, deformed human stepped between us and Devin. Its skin had a similar colored tone as the little girl attacking Devin, but was severely misshapen. Its left shoulder and arm were abnormally broad and muscular. The being's right arm was missing and its chest looked firm, but you could see the ribcage's outline. The large man's torso narrowed towards his hips, connecting to a pair of legs with thighs thick as tree trunks. It was covered in brown and gray blotchy patches that I couldn't tell were mud or actual skin. Its most disturbing feature was a light pink soccer ball-sized growth, protruding from its neck that seemed to have absorbed part of its face's left side. Appearing uninterested, the alpha-looking male snarled at us with its awkwardly bent nose and twisted, toothy mouth before facing Devin. The child-sized female, whose face and hands were coated in blood, excitedly pranced around Devin while he hollered in hysterical agony on the ground. Both his calves had massive chunks of flesh missing, with some areas even exposing parts of his tibias and fibulas. The alpha male swiftly broke off a thick tree limb and began ruthlessly bludgeoning Devin, while the little girl wildly cheered on her gargantuan counterpart. "Let's go," Claire whispered and pulled me from the graphic scene unfolding. The last thing I saw before looking away was the alpha male pressing its unnaturally oversized hand against Devin's head, whose skull began to cave under the mounting pressure. We took off in another direction, which the two beings didn't seem to notice or care about, remaining preoccupied with Devin's lifeless body. Beelining towards Forest's edge, Claire raced ahead of me and was first to reach the road. I watched Claire sprint out of the woods, but at that same time, the road bend she burst onto was illuminated by a yellowish-white glow. No sooner than realizing they were headlights, whose luminosity seemed to swallow up Claire, I heard two loud thuds mixed with the screechy grinding of a vehicle abruptly braking. Screaming Claire's name as I had emerged, my fears were confirmed that she had been hit by the oncoming vehicle. I quickly dropped to my knees alongside her, who was out cold, and brandished a fresh set of cuts and bruises from the impact. Frantically shaking and tapping her face, I checked Claire's pulse, exhaling in relief when I felt its slow, redundant beats in her neck. "Where did you guys come from?" A familiar voice blurted from my backside, during which Gabby appeared next to me, falling to her knees and scrambling over Claire's unconscious body. While she whimpered and desperately pleaded for her sister to be okay, a heavy hand fell on my shoulder. I quickly turned to face who was behind me and was overcome with relief upon seeing that it was Braden. He was clearly distraught over hitting Claire and repeatedly asking if we were okay, while the others spilled out from his truck. I saw Corey and Shane, but was surprised when Gabby and Tobias also exited the vehicle. They both rushed over to Claire, while I spoke with Braden and the other SCAR team members. Braden said that they had found Tobias and Gabby alongside the road, who filled them in on everything that had happened and mentioned how we ran into each other. I was suspicious about the other SCAR members running into Tobias and Claire at first, but ultimately figured it wasn't that great of a coincidence, since we were probably the only ones running around out here at this time of night. Fortunately, Claire came back through and was having an emotional reunion with her sister and fiancé that had to cut short after reminding them of our dire situation. The other SCAR members didn't comprehend the magnitude of what was happening until I revealed that Mitch and Devin were both dead. Shane was really rattled by the news, who neared a point of hysteria before Shane and Braden got him in the truck. After we had loaded up Claire, I made sure the trunk was empty before Braden began driving. Claire was still dazed from the impact and fell in and out of consciousness throughout the drive. Gabby tried keeping her awake and alert, fearing she might have suffered some sort of head trauma, and didn't want her sister dozing off if that were the case. We initially intended on heading back to civilization for help. However, when the ranger station came within view, we decided to check it out, since we were at least an hour from the nearest town. Braden pulled into the station's dirt lot as we briefly inspected our surroundings before exiting. A few lights were on inside the two-story cabin, and Gabby pointed out someone who appeared to be sitting at the main room's front desk. Gabby, Braden, and myself entered the cabin, while Tobias, Shane, and Corey stayed with Claire. Upon entering the ranger station, we were aghast at the bloody mess that greeted us, which centered around a body slouched over in an office chair. The office was in complete disarray, showing clear signs of a violent struggle. The ranger's body was missing its arms, entire upper right side of his face and jaw. 4 large gashes ran in different directions across his chest and abdomen, from which blood and bodily entrails that spilled from the gaping wounds formed a tight circle around the chair containing the body. Not a pretty sight, is it? A man said as he entered the office from a darkened room. He was already like that when I got here. I reckon they did this to him earlier in the night. But I just did a sweep of the station and I assured you, it's just us here. This man had on the same uniform as the dead ranger, a forest green button-down and beige khakis that was covered in red and brown stains. He also wore dark boots and a black cowboy hat covering his short black hair. He had pale skin, a lean toned figure, and was well over 6 feet tall. The man had a narrow face, a short cleft chin, dark eyes, and a thin goatee. What kept us frozen in place was the revolver openly displayed in his holster, and bolt-action rifle he pointed in our direction. "It's you," I said sternly, immediately recognizing him as the man who had abducted me from the car wreck. "Kurt." He smirked. "Yeah, I'm still ticked off you guys ruined my bait station," Kurt said, gesturing outside with his head. "I had a good setup there." "You're sick. Why are you doing this to us?" Gabby asked in a shaky voice, clearly terrified by Kurt's reappearance. "We just want to leave." "I'm here cleaning up your sister's mess," Kurt replied sneeringly. During our tense exchange, Braden drifted towards a nearby CB radio. He was 2 or 3 steps away when Kurt quickly turned towards the table that it was on and fired a round from his rifle that shattered the radio into pieces. Everyone either screamed or violently winced at Kurt's shot, which filled my ears with an intense ringing. Kurt began yelling and shaking his rifle. Although the ringing in my ears prevented me from hearing what he said, I slowly stepped back, sensing from his body language that he wasn't in a joking mood. When the ringing finally subsided, the first thing I heard was a guttural, thunderous scream coming from outside. "It'd be smart to get your friends inside before they close in," Kurt said in acknowledgement to the shriek that undoubtedly came from one of those hideous creatures. Braden opened the door to go outside, but Shane and Corey were already a few steps from the cabin entrance. Kurt came out with us, keeping his rifle trained on the impenetrable darkness. Gabby told Shane and Corey to get Claire from the car and bring her inside, during which Kurt fired another round. I and a few others saw what he was shooting at, the small child-sized creature darting in between 2 trees, which accelerated our urgency to move Claire. She was semi-conscious when we had reached the car, and needed our help getting on her feet. Shane and Corey pulled Claire out and guided her, while Brayden and Tobias stayed close behind and hurried them into the cabin. While returning inside, Claire tripped on a step and almost fell, but Corey managed to grab her in time. Claire was wincing in pain when we got her inside. The stumble she took appeared to have injured her ankle. I stood a few feet from the doorway and I watched as Brayden, who was the last to enter, was about to step inside, when a pair of feet landed on his shoulders, appearing to have jumped down from directly above the entrance. A hand from the body these feet were attached to sank its claw-like nails into Brayden's eyes, who released a horrifying scream and stumbled backwards before falling. Brayden's attacker jumped to the ground and stood over him, and sank its claws into either side of his lower abdomen in a single motion, essentially latching onto Brayden's browed figure. While it maneuvered to stand above Brayden's backside, I caught my first glance of the being, an adult-looking female. She had a mop of frizzy black hair that ran the length of her back, containing clumps of dirt, twigs, and leaves. Her lips looked like they were torn off, exposing her reddish-gray teeth and gums, while her large, manic black eyes were surrounded by thick, dark red circles. Her saggy, wrinkled skin had a brownish-orange tint, and was also littered with gray and brown, blotchy patches that were indistinguishable between actual skin or grime. The feral-looking being started dragging Brayden from the door, but not before Kurt grabbed onto his arm. He tried heaving Brayden back into the doorway, taking the female by surprise, whose one hand slipped out of Brayden's side. I caught a brief glimpse of the fiend's claws, more so resembling thick fingernails about 3 to 4 inches long, with pointed triangular tips, before she thrust them into another spot right above Brayden's hip. He continued wailing in torment as Shane rushed over to grab Brayden's other arm, during which the female firmly planted its feet on the ground and started dragging Brayden from the door. The pitch of Brayden's screams heightened and were accompanied by a sharp ripping sound, which was the being's embedded clawed fingernails slicing through his sides, creating deep wounds that slowly began stretching his abdomen. I stared horrified at Brayden, whose beet red face was matted with perspiration, and expressed the blatant unbearable agony he was undergoing. It prompted me to run over and help, when a whitish pale flash slammed into the doorway. I could tell just by looking at its menacing green eyes that this was the same being that had attacked us in Tobias's car, which looked like a mature male, but significantly younger and physically inferior to the mammoth alpha figure Claire and I had encountered. While trying to force itself through the doorway, the fiend didn't acknowledge me while opening its gaping mouth filled with misshapen teeth and furiously clamped down on Kurt's arm. As Kurt hollered in pain, Tobias and Corey rammed their shoulders against the door, trying to prevent the male being from getting inside the cabin. I was completely speechless, unable to budge while comprehending everything going on. Kurt and Brayden's simultaneous screams, the ongoing tug-of-war over Brayden between us and those monstrous savages, and the same creature that had attacked us earlier on the verge of bursting into the ranger station. I was on the verge of succumbing to panic when I noticed Kurt's rifle leaning against the wall unattended, along with his holster being completely exposed. Rushing over, I instinctively grabbed Kurt's revolver and cocked the pistol, while Kurt screamed for me to shoot the fiend whose jaws were still clenched around his arm. I shakily held out the revolver and squeezed the trigger, firing around that at the very least grazed the creature's head, which was enough for it to release Kurt's arm and retreat. Corey and Tobias pushed more of the door shut, but wedged Brayden, who was now convulsing and spurting blood from his mouth, in the entranceway. Shane grabbed Brayden's arm, urging him to hang on, which was when I noticed a growing bulge protruding from his stomach. He released a gargled scream as the bulge grew bigger, until 4 distinct points formed under his shirt and cut through the fabric, revealing it to be the female's clawed hand. The vile being literally sank its hand into Brayden's back and pushed it completely through his body. Shane was so petrified that he lost grip on Brayden's arm, who was swiftly dragged outside in what felt like an instant. Tobias and Corey slammed the door shut, while Kurt reeled on the floor. Shane, who I stood behind, remained frozen in terror, staring at the spot where Brayden once lay, his lip quivering and widened eyes containing an expression of astonishment and fright. And Kurt was completely focused on his arm, which had 2 bite-sized chunks of flesh missing and bled profusely. I was closer to the rifle now, which I brought to the other's attention before taking 2 quick steps and snatching the firearm with one hand, while pointing the revolver at Kurt. Tobias rushed over, who quickly retrieved the rifle and trained it on Kurt. Still grimacing when he faced us, Kurt seemed to disregard the 2 guns aimed at him, remaining more concerned about his mangled limb. Shane wedged a chair beneath the doorknob and noted the first-floor windows had bare shutters over them, clarifying that the ranger station was more or less secure for the time being. Corey checked the rest of the cabin while Gabby tended to Claire, who she had laid out on a couch in the adjacent room. Despite Braden's ongoing muffled screams and sounds of him getting torn apart, we didn't take our eyes off of Kurt.
"All right,"
Kurt gasped, grating his teeth while undoing the button-down he wore and began wrapping it around his arm.
"I guess I got a bit of explaining to do."
Braden's screams and any sounds of movement outside faded after a few more minutes. Corey threw a sheet over the dead ranger and wheeled his body into a back room. Tobias and I kept the guns trained on Kurt, while Shane made sure both cabin entrances were secure. Gabby, who I learned was a nurse, found a first aid kit for Claire, who regained consciousness.
"I cut them,"
Kurt said nonchalantly after he noticed Shane and Corey trying the phone lines and internet.
"I'm trying to keep this as quiet as possible. You're all struggling to realize that."
"The heck are you talking about?" Tobias asked after a brief pause. Kurt took a deep breath and exhaled slowly.
"The people that I work for."
"Wild again," Claire said, unexpectedly walking up alongside and staring menacingly at Kurt. "He works for a group called Wild again." Kurt was silent for a few seconds before awkwardly nodding to confirm Claire's comments. "Who are they?" Tobias asked sternly. Kurt smirked.
"They'll keep this quiet if you prevent me from doing it."
"Who are they?" I repeated demandingly. Tobias had to ask a 3rd time before he finally responded.
"They're a hunting club."
"Elaborate," Tobias barked. Sighing, Kurt slowly hung his head, clearly apprehensive about revealing this information.
"They're a special kind of hunting club.
A very, very unique, exclusive, secretive one." That sly smirk returned to his face.
"The group was supposedly found in Germany sometime in the 30s. They breed and raise humans to be completely feral, primal with predatory animalistic instincts. They pump them with steroids, hormones, and other chemicals to manipulate their maturation rates, physical growth, bodily senses, and their brain development." Our jaws dropped as we exchanged perturbed glances, all of us clearly unsure how to respond. "Why?"
Shane, who migrated over to us with Corey and Gabby, had asked.
"Think about it. For these elitist big game hunters who bagged every conceivable trophy out there, what better feat to pursue than an apex predator of their own kind? One that's smart and strong enough to hunt you back. It's the ultimate challenge for them, one that they'll pay top dollar for."
Kurt nodded towards the door.
"They're simply called Untamed. Those things outside that we're hiding from. They're Wild Jagan's creations. They breed and raise them in controlled, cordoned off environments where they spend their days killing before being killed."
"Those things out there, they're humans? Actual human beings?" Tobias asked excitedly, his grip tightening on his rifle. Kurt shrugged.
"Genetically, just as human as you and I."
"And this is the group you're loyal to?" Gabby asked.
"I'm loyal to circumstance,"
Kurt quickly replied.
"I'm loyal to the moment."
Kurt confirmed that Wild Jagan did indeed have a compound in this national forest. He said when Claire had infiltrated the property, she had entered through the hunting grounds and left an opening in the fence large enough for 5 Untamed to escape through, before that it was discovered. Kurt and another mercenary, the man Devin and I had found earlier, were tasked with eliminating the escaped Untamed. They disguised themselves as game wardens so they could roam about more freely, and despite being able to track them pretty handily, only killed just 1 of the 5. Claire confronted Kurt about selling her baby to him 7 years ago, who said that he had remembered the exchange. And to Claire's infuriation, he was very dismissive about the ordeal and returned to scrutinizing us for sabotaging his plans. "I was gonna focus on the Untamed first and then deal with you guys after," Kurt said when explaining why he held Claire and I captive. "One problem at a time. The other guy was dead weight, but his dumbass getting killed forced me to do everything myself. He didn't know what he was getting into. And not for nothing. If you guys didn't screw up my bait station, your one friend would probably still be alive. You just made things worse by freeing him." "You were using him as bait," Corey snapped, stepping towards Kurt, before Tobias held out his arm to keep him from advancing. "Like I would actually let him die," Kurt replied pompously, rolling his eyes. "I'm a marksman. I would have picked those guys off before they got anywhere near him, but you all decided to screw it up." "What happened to her?" Claire asked in regards to her daughter. Kurt scoffed at the question. "How am I supposed to know? That was 7 years ago. I don't even do that kind of work anymore, getting new specimens," Kurt exclaimed, acting like Claire's question wasted his time. "If what you saw outside is any indication, she's probably all messed up like they are by now, assuming she already hasn't been bagged by a client. And what are you gonna do even if you find her? Recondition her to be normal when she never was in the first place." Gabby and I had to restrain Claire, who tried charging at Kurt. "I'm sorry, but that's what happens when you stick your nose where you're not supposed to," Kurt said arrogantly, his cocky smirk only making Claire irater. "We had nothing to do with this," Corey angrily shouted. "We were only doing our Bigfoot show. We were minding our own business. We got pulled into this unknowingly." Kurt burst out laughing. "Well, now you know there are scarier and realer things in the woods to watch out for." "Take me to the compound," Claire demanded, freeing herself from mine and Gabby's grips as she stomped towards Kurt. "I know that's where she is. It took years, but I'm getting answers now, and I'm not leaving here without her." Pulling out a knife that she had concealed on her person, Claire pressed it against Kurt's neck. "And so help me, if your people hurt her in any way, I'll start with you," she grumbled, the blade breaking skin on Kurt's neck and drawing blood. A few of us reminded Claire it wasn't possible to go anywhere right now, not with the Untamed lurking outside, but she ignored our remarks, keeping completely focused on Kurt. Gabby tried urging Claire that he wasn't going anywhere, and he would answer to authorities when he got arrested, which caused Kurt, who seemed amused by Claire's aggressive actions, to chuckle. "I'll tell you what," Kurt said. "I'll bring you if we get out of this alive. So, figure something out." Claire pressed the knife harder against Kurt's neck, while Gabby and Tobias begged her to stop. "Just ignore him," Gabby pleaded, clearly afraid Claire might do something bad. "I know he's a bad man, but you'll be right back here where you started if you do anything to him," Tobias added. "We've got things under control right now." "Listen to them, Claire," Corey chimed in, locking his hands together to make a begging gesture. Claire didn't budge until the sounds of glass shattering came from upstairs, followed by thumping footsteps of more than one individual that moved in different directions. "They were getting in sooner or later," Kurt said softly as Claire eased up on the knife against her neck. "They're smarter, craftier, and more cunning than they appear. Don't underestimate them. This is practically an art form for them. They kill things just to kill them." While trying to track the footsteps overhead, everyone formed a tight circle around Kurt and Claire. 3 thunderous bangs jolted the front door, followed by a deep grating roar-like scream that completely occupied our attention. Dropping from the catwalk directly above us was the child-sized Untamed. It landed on Shane's shoulders, similar to how the other female had jumped on Brayden, hooked one of her arms around his neck, and began furiously attacking him with a sharpened stick. Chaos ensued in response, during which the female Untamed that attacked Brayden rushed down these stairs, blindly swinging her sharpened clawed fingernails. "Shoot it!" I heard Corey yell at Tobias, who stood near Shane. Shane's frantic shrieks and cries filled the room, as blood spilled and spurted from his face and neck. Although shaking, Tobias nervously raised the rifle, looking like he was trying to set his aim as he loaded a round into the chamber, while Corey and Claire repeatedly screamed for him to shoot. In what felt like the blink of an eye, the child-sized Untamed jumped off Shane right before Tobias fired the rifle. Shane's entire jaw and right side of his face exploded in a plume of red mist from the shot, causing Gabby and I to start screaming hysterically as his body dropped to the floor. Tobias was in absolute shock, preventing him from noticing the adult female Untamed, which tackled him and started fiercely slashing at his face and arms. At this moment, I realized the revolver was no longer in my possession. Panic set in while I manically scanned my surroundings as Tobias desperately cried for help, and Gabby screamed incoherently in the background. I spotted it near the front door, but Claire scooped up the gun first and didn't hesitate to empty its remaining rounds into the Untamed on top of Tobias. Her thick crock of hair made it hard to see if and where any of Claire's shots had hit, but the Untamed stiffened posture and its slowly falling over indisputably confirmed that it was dead. "That's how you get him off someone," I heard Claire whisper, clearly referring to Tobias's fatal mishap of Shane. Claire and I got Tobias back up, who suffered some serious wounds. The worst was a deep gash across his face that split open his left nostril, gums, and a side of his lip, which dangled off the edge of his mouth. "Where's Kurt?" Corey asked, whose question made me freeze. Kurt was gone. Gabby pointed out that he left through the back way, which was now slightly ajar, and viewable from where we stood. Another rattling thud jolted the front door, which started to splinter. Unconfident that the barricades would hold, we hurried towards the back door, during which we heard 3 more bashes come from the front. We managed to get outside before the front door finally broke down, and the large alpha male entered. Outside, however, the child-sized Untamed stood between us and Claire, who was trembling uncontrollably. From where we stood, I noticed more details about the tinier female Untamed, namely its deformed right arm, resembling 2 sausage links or an hourglass. Of a small section of her central right forearm became abnormally narrow, with any part beyond that point appeared completely limp, and covered with patches of gray brownish purple discoloration. The non-functional hand's short chubby appendages, however, did have what looked like different sized hooks and fingernails embedded in their stumps in lieu of fingertips. A flash caught my eye when the Untamed shrugged its shoulders, while slightly turning her right arm in our direction. My blood ran cold. I now understood why Claire, who stood quivering with tears rolling down her cheeks, was so emotionally paralyzed. The flash that caught my eye was a pink, heart-shaped charm. It dangled from a thin gold bracelet that made up the narrowed area of her disfigured forearm. The most disturbing detail was how the bracelet appeared permanently embedded in her skin, whose arm apparently grew around the band, causing the malformation. Reminding myself she was a little girl, I whispered a soft, "No," under my breath when I put everything together. This was Claire's daughter. She found her daughter. I was partially unnerved by the child Untamed's grotesque face. The sides of her mouth had deep cuts into her cheeks, making it appear like she always brandished a wide, fleshy grin. It was what the Untamed proudly perceived as a standoff. Claire was actually having perhaps the most revealing moment of her life, facing the morbid reality of her past actions and consequences. "I'm sorry," I heard Claire whisper as she slowly dropped to her knees. "I'm just so sorry that I did this to you." She started sobbing as the girl walked up to her, whose face's rabid, hostile expression beamed with anticipation. Claire continued weeping and tightly embraced her daughter when she came within reach. Unfazed by Claire's affectionate gesture, the Untamed didn't hesitate to bite into her neck. As the life slowly drained out of Claire's body, she looked accepting of her fate, like she had achieved peace of mind and a means of reciprocation for depriving her daughter of a chance to live a normal life. The child viciously extracted a mouthful of Claire's jugular, whose body went limp. And despite his grave injuries, Tobias screamed in anguish and broke away from us to make an already vain attempt to save his fiancée. He managed to take just 4 or 5 steps before getting blindsided by the other male Untamed, who had emerged from behind the cabin's natural gas tank. The being tackled Tobias to the ground and chomped down on his hand that he had extended towards Claire. The struggle made me jump into action. I grabbed a glass shard that I had spotted near the dumpster and raced towards Tobias, who had 2 of his fingers bitten off by the Untamed. The fiend was exacerbating Tobias's facial wounds by slashing and digging his fingers into his gashes, while he screamed and writhed on the ground, trying to escape from the monstrous fiend's unforgiving grasp. The Untamed turned towards me at the last second when I ran up and jammed the glass shard in one of its oversized eyes. Shrieking in agony, the being fell off Tobias and desperately grabbed onto its face around the glass shard protruding from its eye, as it wildly squirmed on the ground. Although Tobias was reeling from the additional trauma he had suffered, I started dragging him away with Corey's help, who unexpectedly froze and looked back at the cabin. "It's burning," Corey blurted out, pointing at the ranger station, from which black smoke was pouring out of the back entrance. Unless one of the Untamed did it inadvertently, I suspected Kurt had started the fire as a distraction to help him escape, or destroy any evidence of what had happened that night. Probably both. I became alarmed when flames started emerging from the back door, which I realized was adjacent to the cabin's natural gas tank. "We need to go, now," I barked at Corey while trying to keep Tobias moving, who could barely stand on his own. Before rounding the cabin, I looked back to see the Untamed that had attacked Tobias was gone. The little girl, however, remained and continued playfully dismembering Claire's body. She bit off so much of Claire's neck that her head was bent at an unnatural 90-degree angle. Her body made unsettling, grotesque twitch-like gestures as the girl continued on, alternating with a sharpened stick and bare hands. Pausing, I blocked out Corey furiously asking me why I had stopped, and completely zoned in on Claire's daughter. It just wasn't right, I thought. This little girl should be an ordinary person, but wasn't given that life. Instead, she was brought into this unfathomable existence. I partly resented Claire for letting this happen to her own flesh and blood, while continuing to observe the girl's barbaric primal instincts in action. There really was no saving someone like this, I thought, getting overcome with a heavy sense of sorrow upon deducing this little girl was inevitably doomed and unconformable. "We can't just leave her here, let her live like this," I said softly, completely disregarding the burning cabin. "What are you talking about?" Corey asked anxiously, while readjusting his grip on Tobias. "We need to put her out of her misery," I said woefully. "I mean, look at her. What person deserves to live like that? And a little kid, no less. She doesn't even know that she's human." The Untamed noticed me watching while she was rubbing her pointed stick up and down Claire's exposed ribcage. Snarling at me, her disfigured face darkened as she made hostile, low-sounding growls, while flashing her teeth like dogs do in standoffs. She started advancing towards us, shifting between walking bipedally or crawling on all fours. I blocked out Corey's frantic cries telling me to run, and heard him shuffle off with Tobias, despite the ravenous desire to kill in her eyes, the kind of ferocity you typically only see in an animal stare. I wasn't afraid of the little girl. Whether it was the pity I felt for this reprehensibly tragic outcome, or the strong sense of guilt experienced out of seeming obligation to continue Claire's remorse on our behalf, I remained where I stood. Upon coming within 3 or 4 yards, the girl started moving in like a large circle around me, shifting in a sideways crab-like crawl on all fours, whose movements looked too unnatural for an actual human to make. She was clearly waiting for the right opportunity to pounce, during which she continued growling and snarling while moving in that orbital motion, keeping her front side facing me the whole time. The Untamed was about to rise from standing on all fours when a loud crackling boom rang out, causing my ears to ring. When I looked back at the little girl, there was a baseball-sized opening in the center of her chest. I watched its eyes roll in the back of her head as the life escaped her monstrous face, as the Untamed dropped back on all fours before collapsing on her side. I looked behind me and saw Gabby standing a few yards away, holding Kurt's rifle. She started jogging in my direction, urging me to get away from the cabin. Flames continued shooting out from the back doorway, and they were beginning to envelop the gas tank. My dire sense of urgency returned as I gave the body of Claire's daughter one last glance before making my way around to the front of the cabin. Smoke poured from under the crevices of the ranger station's front door and the window shutters, while an orangey glow came from the second-story windows. Scanning the vicinity for Tobias and Corey, I quickly noticed the smears and splatter marks of blood, along with other bodily pieces scattered across the cabin's front porch, the wooden ramp, and the dirt lot. There was a large chunk of meat wearing tattered remnants of clothing on the ramp that I quickly identified as Braden's remains, who they had torn to pieces. Before adequately processing the macabre scene, Gabby and I stood before. My eyes drifted towards Braden's truck, which was our best means of escape. Corey emerged from the other side with a worried look across his face, and confirmed what I already dreaded. "We don't have the keys," he exclaimed, gesturing towards the car with his hand as he came up to myself and Gabby. "It's unlocked. I got Tobias in, but he's in really bad shape. And Braden, he still had the keys." Corey's voice faded as he visually acknowledged what remained of Braden's body. The three of us looked at each other, knowing a search of his body with time not on our side was inevitable. We warily moved towards the ramp where Braden's body lay, our cautious approach largely influenced by the hands-on task we were about to perform. Then the sweltering heat and flames now seeping out from under the cabin's front door. Forming a semicircle around Braden's body, we hurriedly inspected it and the surrounding area, obviously hoping to see the keys laying somewhere so we wouldn't have to start sifting through the body's pockets. "There," Gabby said softly, gesturing towards the bushes growing alongside the ramp. Gabby pointed at Braden's severed hand, which tightly clenched his truck's keys. Initially scrambling away from the severed limb, Corey, who was the closest, turned back and looked at us, knowing that he had no choice. Taking a slow breath, he pressed down on the hand-severed end with his foot, while unraveling its stiff fingers to obtain the truck keys. Corey's face was green when he had retrieved them, and started running towards the truck but stopped about halfway to vomit. After his episode concluded, Corey reached the truck, but abruptly stiffened and grabbed onto the sides of his head with both hands. "No," Corey murmured, his face filling with dismay. When I realized what Corey was reacting to, my heart sank. We didn't realize it earlier, but all four of the truck's tires were flat. While coping with this crippling setback and realizing our only way out of these woods was now on foot, a rush of fury swept through me as I envisioned the individual who was definitely responsible. Kurt. "That son of a..." I whispered under my breath, looking at Gabby and Corey, who both had wide-eyed, aghast expressions of trepidation and uncertainty. We walked around to the passenger side where Corey loaded Tobias in the back, and were greeted to a grisly scene. Blood was splattered across the vehicle's entire side, and its back door was wide open. Along the tree line, we saw the alpha male Untamed standing over Tobias, who lay face down. Whether he was conscious we'll never know, as we helplessly watched the alpha male grab Tobias's head and make a series of sharp, twisting motions, completely turning it like he was removing a bottle cap. Each turn produced a series of squishes, crunches, and pops, while the hulking Untamed stared at us with a deranged, maniacal expression, clearly exhibiting the pleasure it got from killing Tobias. Corey screamed for Gabby to shoot the beam when it finally severed Tobias's head, which he began to inspect with majesty and wonder. And despite her shaking limbs, Gabby unsteadily took aim and fired a round that managed to strike the Untamed's swollen shoulder. Dropping Tobias's head, the fiend recoiled as it shrieked in affliction, pressing its massive hand over the gunshot wound as it angrily faced our direction. Stepping forward, the alpha male looked ready to charge, but tensed up and appeared to gaze beyond us, the frenzied look in his face quickly fading as it appeared to contemplate its next actions. While Gabby struggled to discharge the empty round she fired, The alpha male snarled at us one last time and scampered off into the forest. We looked at each other in bewilderment for a few seconds before turning to see what the Untamed had reacted to: the flame-engulfed cabin. No sooner than we all faced the ranger station, we heard a high-pitched hissing that instantly reminded us of the natural gas tank. With no other options, we sprinted from the burning ranger station. My estimate, we got about 15 to 20 yards before the tank finally blew, consuming the cabin in a giant fireball that ejected millions of debris pieces in every direction. The deafening explosion's ferocity threw me into a muddy ditch alongside the road, getting dazed from the harsh impact as my body slammed into the ground. Unable to move, I stared out into the woods, focusing on a ridgeline about 100 feet from the road. I don't know what I saw next or if it had anything to do with what happened to us, but just as I had spotted it, a solid black humanoid figure with a round cone-shaped head ducked behind the rocky ridgeline. I couldn't make out any more details. It definitely wasn't an Untamed, and it looked too broad to be a person. The lighting wasn't spectacular and I may have only imagined it, but I didn't dwell on it for long at the time as I quickly became occupied with the sense of feeling returning in my limbs. Looking back at that moment, however, maybe just maybe I actually saw what we originally came here to try and find. It's hard to say. The blast attracted enough attention for someone to send help, which took over an hour to arrive. We were treated for our injuries and gave testimony on our versions of what had happened that night. Despite our correlating stories, the absence of definitive evidence, at least according to authorities who seemed skeptical, made our accounts impossible to verify. The remains of Mitch or Devon were never found, nor was there any mention of the Untamed or other unidentified creatures in the final report. It officially stated the explosion was caused by a heated system malfunction that happened to occur just as the SCAR team arrived at the ranger station to report their team members, Mitch and Devon, missing. The report stated we came across Gabby and Tobias whose car broke down and gave them a ride. Perhaps what bothered me most was after reading through the final report, I noticed that there was no mention of Claire or her missing daughter. Any efforts to reveal what actually happened that night were futile. As far as I know, the Untamed that got away are still lurking in those woods. Kurt is probably still working for the mysterious Wild Jaeger organization and might have succeeded in hunting down the remained Untamed for all I know. I've tried contacting Gabby and Corey, but neither are willing to revisit that night. It's hard to function regularly knowing a heinous organization like Wild Jaeger exists, whose sole purpose is turning innocent, unsuspecting humans into monstrous, predatory game that gets hunted for sport. I wonder how many Untamed have been deprived of a normal life and turned into these vicious, feral beings that, if anything, shed light on how close we as humans are to our primeval origins. Seeing what I saw and knowing what I know for me, this story, which started with covering a group of amateur Bigfoot researchers, was far from over. The events of that fateful night only scratched the surface of this dark, hidden truth.
If you're ever driving down Route 106 in Michigan and you see a sign for the Greenbrier Motel, you better just keep on driving, because there is something terribly wrong here, and the last thing that I would want is for more people to die. I started working at the Greenbrier Motel a week ago. It wasn't a dream job by any standards. Night shift at the front desk, checking people in and out, doing some inventory in the back. I liked the peace and quiet though, as a little rundown motel on a stretch of isolated highway in Michigan. It gave me a lot of time to read and play computer games while on the clock. It also helped that the owner, Frank, didn't seem to care that I was a high school dropout with a rap sheet. But on the very first day, I felt that something was terribly off. For one, there was the smell. When the wind shifted, the entire parking lot smelled like rotting meat. I ran to close the windows, but even then I could still smell it, seeping in through the HVAC system. The motel is surrounded by deep woods, so I figured maybe we were near the kill grounds of some animal. Or maybe it was just the endless roadkill of deer and possums on the highway. Either way, it was unsettling, and definitely not enjoyable. The other thing that struck me as odd were the guest rooms. Some of them didn't have windows, and it seemed like that was intentional. I could see the lines in the paint, the seams outlining where the windows had once been. When I asked Frank, he told me that some of the guests asked for windowless rooms, that they were in high demand. He didn't elaborate, and honestly, I was a little scared to press him on it. Things went from strange to downright creepy, however, as soon as Frank left. As I got set up at my desk, a woman walked into the room. She was in her 40s, maybe with black hair and very pale skin. As soon as she had stepped inside, she locked the door behind her. "Frank left, right?" she asked me. Yeah," I replied. Who are you?" She introduced herself as Matilda. She had been working here for a decade, cleaning the motel rooms after the guests had checked out. After a few minutes of small talk, she suddenly came up to the counter and lowered her voice. "I want to make sure that you're safe around here," she said, glancing back towards the door nervously. "So I need you to listen to me, okay?" My heart dropped. Sure." "Whatever you do, don't ask questions. Just check the people in and check them out, and mind your own business. If you do that, you'll be fine." My stomach did a little flip. Okay, so it was that kind of motel. A legal business of multiple kinds, probably, all being conducted under our dilapidated roof. What about if the police come? Why be arrested too then? She gave me a blank stare. "The police? We'll say they find evidence of illegal activity in one of the rooms. Will that get me in trouble? I already have shoplifting on my record and I can't." She shook her head. "Don't worry about the police. Just don't ask questions, and don't make eye contact or look at their faces for too long." I swallowed. They don't want witnesses. They don't want me to be able to pick them out of a lineup, I thought. Okay, I won't ask questions and I won't look at them for too long. I got it. She smiled at me. "Well, then you have nothing to worry about." As it turned out, though, I had quite a lot to worry about. That night, I checked in 3 people. They were almost like caricatures. A big, strong guy in sunglasses that looked like he had stepped right out of The Godfather. A woman dressed to the nines, wearing more makeup than a clown would. A skinny young guy in a hoodie that smelled of something chemical and strange. But I listened to Matilda. I didn't ask questions. I didn't even ask the questions that I should have been asking. Like when the hoodie guy gave me an ID that was clearly fake. Don't ask questions and you'll be fine. I kept repeating that to myself. And then I kept my eyes glued to the computer screen, never even glancing up at them. When it hit midnight, I assumed that the rest of the night would be smooth sailing. On this lonely stretch of highway, it was unlikely that anybody else would be checking in. I pulled up Minesweeper and played some music on my phone. My peace and quiet, however, was interrupted by the door swinging open at around 2 a.m. I glanced up to see the guy in sunglasses, the guy who looked like he had stepped out of The Godfather. Oh no, I should have locked the door. I swallowed and kept my eyes glued to the computer screen as he approached. "Can I help you?" I asked, watching him in my peripheral vision. "Do you have any razors for purchase?" I froze. Razors at 2 a.m. I instantly got a mental image of him slashing somebody up in his room, blood all over the sheets, soaking into the carpet. No, we don't have any razors," I said. keeping my eyes on the computer screen. "Can you just check in the back for me, please?" I swallowed. I really didn't want to go check. As soon as I turned around, he could do anything. Pull out a gun, tackle me, force me into a chokehold, and keep me hostage. But refusing him was just as bad, if not worse. It might make him mad, really mad. I sat there staring at Minesweeper on the screen, weighing my options, paying close attention to him out of the corner of my eye, and that's when I saw it. There was something off about this guy. His sunglasses looked like they were slightly too low on his face, like the eyes they were covering weren't in quite the right place. And not only that, but I couldn't see his eyebrows poking above the frames or the contours of his brow ridge. Everything about the glasses was perfectly flat and smooth, like he had no eye sockets at all. "Can you check in the back, please?" he asked again, his voice taking on an annoyed tone. "Yes, sure." I sprung out of my seat and ducked into the back storage area. I quickly glanced over my shoulder to make sure that he wasn't following me, but he wasn't. I had half a mind to just stay there, hiding out in the back storage room until I heard his voice calling for me. "Did you find them?" He sounded angry, approaching furious. Thankfully, I did find a few packaged razors next to some spare toothbrushes and soap that we kept. I grabbed them and handed them over, keeping my eyes trained on the floor. "Thank you," he said, sounding pleased. And that was it. He turned around and he left. As soon as the door shut, I ran over and locked it. I closed the blinds and sat back down at the front desk, my heart hammering in my chest. All I could picture were these strange contours of his face. And as I sat there, I realized something. All three guests that I had checked in since the start of my shift, the Godfather guy, the makeup woman, the hoodie guy, they had something covering their face or their head. I mean, I wasn't exaggerating about the woman having enough makeup for a clown. She was wearing foundation so thick that it cracked around the corners of her eyes and lips, and wore false eyelashes so long that they gave the appearance of spider legs. And hoodie guy had kept his hood pulled so tightly over his face that his ears and his hair weren't visible. It was like they all had something to hide. Morning couldn't come soon enough. As soon as the day shift workers arrived, I got the hell out of there. I floored it back to my house and slept for a long time, my sleep plagued with nightmares of faceless people and spidery eyelashes. But before I knew it, it was time to go back to the motel for night number 2. Thankfully, it was a quieter night. Although the vacancy sign glowed brightly in the darkness, nobody checked in during my shift. They must have all come earlier during the day shift. I locked the door, sat down with a cup of coffee, and enjoyed getting some reading done in the quiet. Unfortunately for me, the quiet didn't last long. Around midnight, I heard a loud slam from outside. I threw my book down and I ran over to the window. The door to room 16 was wide open. I looked around. Nobody appeared to be outside. The parking lot and the sidewalk were empty. The room itself was dark. None of the lights were on. I walked over to the computer and I looked up the room. To my surprise, no one had booked it for tonight. Should I go out and close the door? I hesitated. It was late already. There was no one around except for the occasional passing car. If somebody had broken into that room and then attacked me, there would be no one to hear me scream. And so I kept the door locked tight and assessed the security camera feed instead. As I rewound it, I saw what happened. The door had opened and then a woman had walked out of it. I couldn't see her face, just her long dark hair. She then disappeared into room 22. I checked room 22 on the computer. and saw that it was booked to a woman named Cassandra Johnson. I frowned. Oh, it looked like Cassandra might be going into our vacant rooms and possibly stealing stuff. Matilda must have forgotten to lock up the room after she had cleaned it. I sighed, opened the door, and began walking towards the open room. I thought of knocking on room 22, but then I thought better of it. Keep your nose out of other people's business. I would just lock up room 16 and go back to the lobby like a good little employee. I walked towards to the open room, but as soon as I got close, a horrible smell wafted out of the room, like something rotting and decaying. My stomach turned. What did Cassandra do in there? Throw up? Stash all their garbage in there? I reached into the darkness of the room. Bracing myself, I flicked on the light. The room looked normal. The bed was made, the carpet was clean, but the smell had only intensified. I pinched my nose as I glanced around, starting to feel nauseous. And then I saw it. There was something on the carpet, just barely poking out from the other side of the bed. What is that? It was tan and folded over itself, like a beige sheet or pillowcase that had been bunched up on the other side. But all of our sheets were white. I stepped into the room, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. The smell got even worse as I approached the bed. Nausea washed over me, and I forced myself to keep going, pinching my nose and swallowing down the urge to throw up. I peered over the side of the bed and froze. There was a pile of beige, slightly translucent material folded over itself on the other side, but I instantly recognized certain shapes attached to it, awfully familiar shapes, like 5 fingers resembling a glove made of skin, poking out from under one of the folds. It looked like somebody had shed their skin. I stepped back, my legs shaking underneath me. Oh no, there's no way, it can't be. I backed away towards the door, my throat dry, because it didn't make any sense. It didn't even make sense with a horrible crime. There wasn't any blood on it. It hadn't been cut off someone. It was like a snake skin, clean and perfect, holding the shape of its wearer like a ghost. I ran out of the room and saw, walking towards me down the sidewalk, the woman from room 22. Strands of her dark, straight hair hung over her face, but I could tell that through her hair there was something wrong with her face. Her eyes, her lips were in slightly the wrong position. She strode towards me fast, her shoes clicking on the pavement. I didn't want to find out what she would do if she caught me. I whipped around and ran as quickly as I could. I could hear her behind me, but I forced myself to go faster and faster until I was back inside of the lobby. I slammed the door shut, clicked the lock, and collapsed in the back room where she couldn't see me. And then the whistling started. Just outside of the door, I could hear her whistling. The source of the sound shifted as she circled the lobby, looking for a way in. I heard it at the door, and then at the back, and then through the side windows, and then back at the front door. This went on for about an hour. Finally, the whistling faded, but I didn't move. I stayed there, huddled in the back storage room until dawn broke. As soon as the day shift arrived, I booked it out of there as fast as I could. I wanted to quit. With everything I am, I wanted to just walk away. But I really needed the money. I already knew how hard it was finding a job with a rap sheet. It was either go back to the job or face eviction. So I went back. When I got on shift, though, I pulled Matilda aside and told her what I had seen. I asked her again and again if my life was in danger. I asked her what the hell was going on here, if other people were in danger too. I promise you, as long as you mind your own business, you'll be safe. So that's what I did. I minded my own business, and for the next few days, nothing of note happened. Sure, there were a few people who checked in that were wearing hats or sunglasses or extra makeup, but I just tried to avoid eye contact with them. Tried to keep my head down and my nose out of other people's business. But then came the night of November 14th. It was raining that night. The rain came down in sheets, and every so often I heard a peal of thunder shake the windows. I wasn't expecting anybody to come in that night, as I hadn't seen that many cars driving by on the highway. The rain seemed to keep everybody in. But then I heard a knock. When I looked up, I saw a man staring in the window. A chill ran down my spine. He was wearing a hoodie that hid his head and kept his face mostly in shadow, and he was rather aggressively banging on the window, like he was in a hurry. I grabbed the mace that I kept under the counter and I slipped it into my pocket, and then I approached the window. "Do you have any vacancies?" he asked in a low voice, barely audible above the pounding rain. The vacancy sign glowed brightly behind him. There's no way that he could have missed it. "Yeah, come on in," I said, unlocking the door with one hand and gripping the mace in my pocket with the other. He stepped inside. Rain dripped off his jacket and onto the floor. I barely glanced at him, turning around and walking back around the counter. And then I sat down at the computer, keeping my eyes fixed on the screen. In my peripheral vision, I could see him, leaning over the counter, his face only about a foot or two from mine, so close that I could smell the stale, mothball odor coming off his clothing, so close that I could hear drops of water plopping onto the counter from his sleeve. "Can you go faster?" he asked, his voice raspy in his throat. "Oh, sorry, sir, I'm going as quickly as I can," I replied, my heart starting to pound. "It's an old computer." My fingers slipped on the mouse as I rushed to click the buttons. "I don't have all day," he growled, looming even closer to me. I wanted to look at him. My eyes were itching to glance up at the man that was 6 inches from my face, but I forced myself to stare at the screen. Whatever the hell was going on here, I was not going to be a witness. I was not going to look up and find myself face to face with a Smith & Wesson. "Your name?" I asked. As soon as the words came out of my mouth, I froze. I needed a name to book the room, that's all. But maybe he wouldn't see it that way. Maybe I wasn't supposed to ask for names. Maybe that was part of Frank's understanding with certain guests. Thankfully, though, nothing happened. After a second of hesitation, he replied, "Daniel Jones." The name struck me as fake. A common first name, common last name. But who even cared at this point? I typed his name into the system and completed the booking process. He paid for the room in cash, which was another unnerving detail, but I tried not to worry about it. I turned my back and took a key off the hook. "Room number 7, I said, handing it to him. He thanked me and then waited by the door. I waited for a minute and then 2, but he didn't leave. "Do you need something?" I asked, careful not to make eye contact. "Can you escort me to my room?" Oh, hell no. There was no way that I would go out there in the middle of the night with this creepy guy. That was like a death sentence. I glanced out the window and spotted his car, a beat-up sedan in one of the nearby parking spaces. The murder scenario played out in my head. Shoves me into the hotel room, kills me, sticks my body in the trunk, throws it in the middle of the woods. Or maybe worse, maybe my skin would end up crumpled on the floor of one of the rooms. Maybe he would take my form or turn me into something that sheds its skin like a snake, that has eyes too low in its face, or no eye sockets at all. And the longer that I looked at him in the corner of my eye, the more I noticed how unsavory he looked. There were smears of dirt on his sleeves and on the hem of his pants. It's like he's been digging a grave, the voice in my head added. His face, half hidden in shadow, was sunken and gaunt. His jaw was covered in gray stubble and his teeth were a horrible shade of grayish yellow. Can't you just go yourself? I have something that I need to do here. My boss is going to be mad. You can take 2 minutes to walk me to my room, damn it. I sat there in stunned silence. He sounded furious. My heart pounded in my ears. Okay, I said finally. My fingers curled around the mace in my pocket and then I joined him by the door. I'll walk you to your room. He didn't thank me. He just grabbed the door and swung it open, nearly letting it swing back in my face. I stepped out into the pouring rain with him. The parking lot was a lake and our feet sloshed loudly through the water. The cold water seeped through my sneakers and I shivered. I followed the man to his car, staying a good 15 feet away. He popped the trunk and I held my breath, but thankfully there was only a duffel bag inside. He hoisted it onto his shoulder and started for room 7. I followed him at a distance, staying several feet away, watching him fidget with the key. You got a lot of other people staying here right now? He asked as he slid the key into the lock. Some, I replied. Not great weather for it. Not really. The storm's supposed to clear tomorrow. It'll be good weather then. Oh, wow, this is taking a while, I thought to myself. And that's when I looked down at his hands and noticed that he wasn't really trying to get into his room. He was just inserting the key, pausing and then pulling it out, over and over again. He was stalling for time. He was keeping me here on purpose. I looked up from his hands, just in time to see him staring at me. His blue eyes were intense, studying me. I wanted to run away. Every inch of me was screaming to get out of there. But the guy had 6 inches on me and was really thin. He'd probably catch me in seconds. I was never much of a runner. I slipped my hands in my pocket, curling my fingers around the maze. Do you need help getting into your room? I asked. He shook his head. I'm going to go back to the front desk then, I said, taking a step back. As soon as I said that though, he froze. His eyes widened as he stared at me. Slowly he shook his head, his lips stretching into a grimace that revealed his yellow teeth. Don't go, he growled, his voice barely audible above the rain. Stay exactly where you are. I leapt into action. I whipped the mace out of my pocket and I held it in front of me, pointing it right at him. Don't get any closer. My finger hovered over the trigger. And then I heard it. Someone was whistling. Behind me, somewhere in the rain, the song cut through the pattering raindrops like a knife. It was the same eerie tune that woman had whistled a few days ago. I'm sorry, the man said quietly, his blue eyes locked on mine. But I needed bait. I stared at him. My brain couldn't even process what he was saying. Bait. I took a stumbling step back. The whistling grew louder. I whipped around through the rain and I could see somebody walking through the parking lot, barely lit by a flickering street lamp. The mace fell from my hands and clattered to the ground, and then I turned and ran as fast as I could towards the lobby. The whistling stopped, and then I could hear loud, splashing footsteps growing louder with every second behind me. I swung the door open, slammed it shut, and turned the lock. I pulled the blinds down over the window. Panting, I parted them with my fingertips and peered out into the night. There was a woman standing in the parking lot, the same woman that I had seen a week ago. Her hair and clothes were drenched with rain, but she was smiling. This big, lopsided grin that sent chills down my spine. And her eyes were strange and wide and wild, incredibly light blue. In the darkness, it almost looked like she didn't have irises at all. Just 2 pinholes for pupils staying right at my door. No, no, no. She took a step forward. I ran over to my desk, grabbed my cell phone, and started dialing 911. Come on, come on. 911, what's your emergency? I'm at the Greenbrier Motel and there's this guy and this weird woman. I was cut off by a loud thump nearby. I ran to the window and peered out. The man who had booked room number 7 was running towards the woman. He was holding something up in the air, a short dagger gleaming silver in the rain. He's attacking her, I screamed into the phone. The woman's face changed. Her features twisted. Her grin crept up to her eyes. Her arms crackled and stretched. She blinked and her eyes turned pure white. Her body twisted unnaturally at the waist, so that she was facing the man. With fast, jolted movements, she leapt at him. Within seconds, he was dead. She stood on all fours above him, her knees bent the wrong way, her fingers far too long. With another horrible crackling sound, her neck stretched out 2 feet long, twisting in serpentine. And then she looked at me. I leapt away from the window with a scream. What's happening? The operator asked me. Sir, please, tell me what's happening. I opened my mouth and tried to speak, but only a squeaking sound came out. By the time that I made it back over to the window, the woman was standing there, looking down at her kill. She looked normal, and then she stepped over his body and walked towards the rooms. To my horror, she pulled out a key and opened room 22, and then she disappeared inside. The police arrived a few minutes later. In strings of gibberish, I begged them to check room 22, that something horrible was lurking inside. But when they knocked on the door, a completely normal-looking woman opened it. I watched from the lobby. I couldn't hear that much of their conversation over the pouring rain, but they weren't arresting her. They weren't accusing her. They seemed to just be having a friendly conversation, asking her what she had seen. And then they thanked her and came back to me. We'll need to see these security tapes from tonight, please, the officer said in an accusing tone. But when I showed them the tapes, they got quiet. One of the officers made a call to someone saying something about an infestation. The other 2 officers ushered me out into the lobby, their faces grim. They told me not to leave as they talked among themselves in hushed voices in the corner of the room. And then they approached me. You didn't see anything tonight, the tall man said, leaning in close. You got that? But what about? Listen to me very carefully, he interrupted, lowering his voice. You didn't see anything, just like you never shoplifted in your life. What? You understand me? He asked. The silence stretched out between us. Yeah, I got it, I said, my voice wavering. I didn't see anything. I left the motel and never went back. I planned to never speak of what I saw, to keep my mouth shut just like they told me to. But after losing many nights of sleep, I realized that I need to warn people. I need to warn you. I can't have another person dying because of these things, whatever they are. So I beg you, if you're driving through Michigan and see that there's a vacancy at the Greenbrier Motel, keep driving.